All right, we'll call the meeting to order. And our first item tonight is item 5. Well, first item is item 4, roll call. So let the roll reflect that all board members were present. Item 5, public comments related to March 14th agenda items.
Mr. President, we have 5 comments related to agenda items this evening.
So as a reminder, when you come up to speak, please state your name, the agenda item that you're speaking about, and your address. And you have 3 minutes to speak. Please don't disrupt our meeting. If you do, we'll warn you one time. If you continue, we'll ask you to leave. We'll let you know when you've got 1 minute left. We want you to use all your time. Just be respectful of the restraints that of the limits that we have. And with that, we will call our first individual.
Okay. First individual is Eric Clausen. And because we have a new setup, there is a microphone over on the side of the room with the flags. Michelle, please.
Yes, Eric Clausen, 1735 Woodstream Lane, Allen, Texas. Here to speak about item number 10, the Lovejoy Scholars Program and considerations for next year.
Okay.
So our family, we have joined the Lovejoy community this year as Lovejoy Scholars. My son Carter is here. He's a 5th grader at Sloan Creek. We've also got a 3rd grader at Hart Elementary. And first off, I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity to speak, and I'd like to thank the entire Lovejoy community for welcoming our family and particularly our sons into the community this year. It has been an absolutely phenomenal, unbelievable experience for ourselves and our sons who have thrived in the Lovejoy school system. It is everything that we hoped for, wished for, and expected coming from the Allen School District, which was not servicing our students in the way that we had expected a top-rated school to do, hence our transition to the Lovejoy School District. Our son's best friends go to Lovejoy schools, are in their classes. We've joined the Pack 358, the Lovejoy associated Boy Scout pack. I mean, we are Lovejoy. We live Lovejoy. I mean, come on. We go to Lovejoy football games. We are a part of this community. We understand that, you know, the program and the criteria and the discussion around tuition was not a permanent known when we signed up last year. We knew that there was going to be the potential that it could change over time. We didn't think that it was going to be 6 months in. And honestly, we're a little bit concerned, and I think a lot of others are as well, at the kind of the tone and the nature that the discussion has tended towards during the most recent school board meetings. Some of the initial discussions were around grandfathering and how to handle current students. A lot of what I've seen in the most recent meetings is more towards, here's the tuition, here's the numbers, here's the fees that we can garnish from students. The last meeting, there was one passing comment about grandfathering, and it feels like there's a lot going on behind closed doors without a lot of transparency about the future of the program, what's going to happen with existing students, and it's creating a lot of stress and anxiety and uncertainty. And I would just ask that when you're making decisions that you remember that we are part of this Lovejoy community. We're not a set of outsiders who are, you know, taking advantage of a situation. We made a very difficult decision to pull our students out of a school where they had friends, where they knew their teachers, to make this transition here. We understand there's financial issues. We are more than happy, and I'm speaking for my family, to be part of the solution. We just don't want to bear the full brunt of being the financial solution. So I think it was very fitting that some of the other public school districts that were referenced in previous slides and previous meetings, $2,000 a student, $1,500 a family, those seem like very reasonable figures. Jumping right back to the tuition-based system that the school district previously had in the lower enrollment with less net financial impact on the district, I think just please consider the families that are already part of the school system.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Our second public comment is Matt Vanderparen.
Hey all, thanks for taking the time here. I'm Matt Vanderparen. I live at 5144 Pondcrest Trail in Fairview. Coincidentally enough, I'm in a neighborhood that looks at Puster. Of course, we're a carve out of McKinney ISD. Didn't really realize that when our 2-year-old was born, but now as he approached kindergarten, looked into coming to the district, saw the tuition was around $10,000 per student. Wasn't possible for our family. We had a daughter at the time too, it was just born. So Lovejoy Scholar came up last year. It was a great opportunity for us to join the district, of course, walk our kids to school, honestly. And, we're glad to do it, and we're really been, to echo a lot of, Eric's comments is, glad to join the district and really commit and, be a part of the entire organization, right? I think, I really wasn't expecting to be here. So if I ramble on a little bit, bear with me. So, came back from spring break and heard a lot of chatter about the Lovejoy Scholars, and it doesn't feel like it's positive tone at this point. So really feel like we need to have the Lovejoy Scholar voices heard a little bit more. I detest Facebook, honestly, but create a Facebook page for Lovejoy Scholars a day because they aren't there yet. And hoping to have everybody's, input there to really kind of do the math with you guys. How many students are you really going to have if you add that tuition? Because I would truly implore you not to add that. Same as you're trying to, manage your budget. We're doing that as a family, and we find it hard that this is happening 8 months after we've joined the community and, joined without the tuition. I wrote a couple notes, but I think I got off track. My kids, I forget them along the way. I got Samuel and Claudine. I got a new kindergartner. It's her first year of school. I can't imagine telling her I have to take her out of school along with Samuel. He's 4th grade. We were really excited for the GT program. That was a big piece of what brought us here out of the McKinney School District. And hearing some changes there, of course, too. And we want to, help how we can. Of course, that tuition is not going to be manageable, and it will affect my family. And same in my neighborhood. I think you'll find that a lot of the teachers at Lovejoy live in my neighborhood because it's so close to the district. I, talked to a lot of my neighbors, and they are very interested in coming here, but that tuition will make it unattainable for most of them. So just want to state that. And I appreciate you hearing me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Our third public comment is Julie McLaughlin.
I'm not that tall. How's that? Is that better? So good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. My name is Julie McLaughlin, 375 Coyote Run in Lucas. I have 2 elementary school kids inside the district. So I have a few items I'd like to speak to you tonight regarding item number 8 on the agenda, our budget process. So first, I'd like to commend the administration team and the board for increased transparency offered at the last board budget workshop. At that meeting, the administration team outlined in 4 hours worth of detail all of the data that you've been gathering regarding capacity of our buildings, projected future enrollment, compensation studies, and benchmarking studies. I have increased confidence in our budget process for this coming year, knowing that we're gathering solid data up front for which to inform our decision making. In future meetings, I'd also like to see a postmortem on past budget actions to understand if we actually did achieve the savings that we had planned. Next, the TASB benchmarking study that was discussed last workshop suggested that some decent sized changes with regard to gifted and talented education, special education, and athletics. While I'm sure that the administration team will take that information, will weigh it objectively against how we want to deliver programming here in Lovejoy. My hope tonight is to hear some discussion from the administration team on how they engage the teachers in that process, specifically if and how they requested GT teacher, SPED teacher, or athletic director feedback on any of the proposed programming changes. Lastly, there is a lot in the news today or this last week regarding retention of our teachers, with Governor Abbott appointing a task force to study why teachers are leaving the profession and record numbers. As a parent whose 2 children's trajectories have been forever changed in a positive way because of our amazing teachers here at Lovejoy. I, of course, hope that we have very high level of retention of our staff. My hope at this workshop or at future meetings is to hear more from the administration team on teacher retention plans. Again, specifically, if we have asked the teachers for their point of view on what changes we would make that would be the most impactful for them, and that our budget presentations will clearly outline if the budget contains a staff raise, if so, how much, and if the steps are included. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
Next is Adam Rotai.
Yeah, I'm at the mic. All right. Hi, my name is Adam Rotai. I'm 1309 West Chimney Rock in Allen. We are part of also the community that is, let's call us the legacy scholars, transition students, whatever. We can go with a number of labels. My son has been in Puster now for 4 years. We've had a wonderful experience. Kevin Parker, Miss Haynes, Miss Collier, Miss Porter, this year Miss Grant have been exceptional, or maybe even great, beyond exceptional for my son and his growth within the school. So Puster does deserve a lot of positive praise in my eyes, myself, my wife, also my niece and nephew as well. So we want to give them a good shout out before I go too far. I'm also coming from a family of administrators, superintendents, GT teachers, coach. So when I start to talk to school or teachers, it comes from a very close place in my heart, and the decisions that you guys make for students, I know you always have the best place in my heart and in their hearts, as well as my son's heart and my daughter's. So they're always right before me, even my son or my daughter. We're also becoming very involved again, and we've been now for 4 years with One Heart, soccer, football, other activities within the school. We're spending a ton of time in PTO and volunteering at Puster. So we are becoming more and more involved, but with tuition the way we're talking, there's going to be a lot of decisions. I hope that I'm not talking for myself. I hope I'm talking for the other minorities, use that word loosely, please, that are in this, what's called predicament or evaluation they have to go through as well. We were part of the original 72 that was considered grandfathered in that I think brought up previously. 1 minute already? Okay. I was very supportive last year of your decision to go consolidate schools. It was the right thing to do. One of the things I think you guys need to understand is the tuition is probably needed. Let's not make it a private level tuition. Let's look at something a little more reasonable within the district that we can attract more students. Their inventory, a widget. We need to get more inventory within the school, I think, but the positive inventory that comes in with the evaluation and the process you guys have in place is good. I am absolutely open to any volunteer opportunities to sit on a board or committee or discussion. Also, within your evaluation, please make sure that the original 72 are grandfathered, that definition and what they have previously been talked about, make sure it's clearly defined. On 1221, the board talked about $1,100 per application fee. I think that could be knocked down by $82,000. Thank you for your time. Sorry I went over.
Thank you, sir.
Tony Triguero.
Hi, my name is Tony Triguero. I'm speaking on item 10, the Lovejoy Scholars. My address is 7507 Harvest Bend Lane in Saxe. I'm just going to read what I wrote and go from there. So my son started attending Lovejoy High School this past year as a junior. Before attending Lovejoy, Lucas was not involved in many school activities, and he did not have many friends outside of school. He was at school to get his schoolwork done, and that was it. But because of the scholar program and the changes last year, We have seen a huge change in our son. Once he started at Lovejoy, he's made more friends than we can count. He's more involved than he's ever been in school functions. He's receiving a great education. We appreciate that. He's attended, football games, volleyball games, pep rallies, other school functions, things that he did not do his freshman or sophomore year before this. It was a big deal for us to pick him up and move him here for the last 2 years of high school. We've seen some, like I said, some great changes. The proposed changes, I don't believe, are taking into account each student and the impact that it has on them and their futures. I believe that the board should be looking at the students that are currently enrolled in Lovejoy this year and how having them change schools again will affect them. We're thankful for the opportunity that we've had to be a Leopard. My son plays on the lacrosse team. I volunteer with the lacrosse team. We're involved. We're here. I mean, he's headed up here right now. So your amazing district has provided a great education for Lucas. He has a lot more self-confidence than before, and lots of memories with friends that he's made since moving here. We just ask that the board would truly consider the students that are currently involved in the program when making the decisions and consider grandfathering those students in. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak and the consideration for my son. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
That concludes the public comments.
Thank you. Thank you all for those comments. We'll move to item 6. Consider and act to hire a director of elementary education, early childhood, Ms. Koenig. Or Dr. Tinsley.
Yes, with the recent reorganization of the curriculum and instruction department and reassignment of responsibilities, there's been a new position created called the Director of Elementary Education and Early Childhood. We believe this addition of this position and will assist with and the realignment of responsibilities will improve efficiencies for elementary and secondary teaching and learning. And also this new position will be responsible for leadership for the Lovejoy Child Development Center and the development of a comprehensive plan to grow the Lovejoy ISD early childhood programming. So I'm pleased to recommend Miss Erin Perkins for the position of Director of Elementary Education and Early Childhood. Ms. Perkins is currently serving as principal at Spring Creek Elementary in Richardson ISD. Prior to being named principal, she served as an assistant principal in both Richardson ISD and Wiley ISD. And she also has experience as a learning specialist and elementary teacher.
Thank you. Any questions?
No, I just wanted to maybe highlight that because of the reorganization in our board notes, it says no additional costs will be incurred with this position. So I thought that would be nice to highlight in the midst of talking about that.
Yes, and you'll hear a little bit more later about the reorganization. I'll go into more detail about the department as well, but that's correct. Erin and her family are here tonight too.
Oh,
so.
great. I was looking
Yeah.
down. I was like, oh, we're going to see
Is this Erin?
Oh, good.
All right. Any other questions? Not, I need a motion, please.
So moved. We'll make this higher.
Chad- So moved, Chad Collins, second, Ann Smith. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Welcome aboard. Thank you, Dr. Tinsley. Item 7, consider and act on the adjustment to the school calendar, high school early release times for May 24th through 26th.
Thank you. If you'll remember, on February 3rd and 4th, we had some inclement weather, and in response to that inclement weather, those 2 days, we did a couple of things K-8. We, of course, are going to utilize one of our bad weather days, which is April 18th. We've also added 3 minutes to our school day for K-8. At the high school, we did one of those 2 things. We are going to go to school and for one of their bad weather days, which is April 18th. Assuming nothing else happened, we didn't make any other adjustments to the high school schedule. However, February 24th happened. We had another bad weather day. And when February 24th occurred, we needed to make, we were going to file a waiver for us to be excused from having to make up that day K-8. For our 9-12 students at Lovejoy High School, we needed to attempt make one more attempt to adjust our minutes or another bad weather day. Since we don't have another bad weather day on our calendar, we need to make a minutes adjustment to our high school calendar. And the recommendation is to, we're required 75,600 minutes. After February 24th, we're 105 minutes shy of meeting that requirement for our 9-12 students. So we are recommending that on May 24th, 25th, and 26th, which are already early release days during our final exam schedule at the high school, that we extend those days, the early release time from 1 o'clock to 1:35. That will put us exactly at 75,600 minutes.
Okay. You all heard the recommendation? Any questions?
So moved to make the adjustment.
So move Jason James. Second Jeff Wood. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right, Dr. Duplessis, Finance and Budget.
Good evening. We have a brief update for you as we do most workshops and board meetings on finance as it is in Lovejoy ISD today and our budget development as we prepare for next year. So we're going to update you briefly on the 21-22 status, some current measures that we put into place for our current year budget, and some considerations for next fiscal year. So as we've taken on new roles and we've all kind of looked at all the different areas that we've seen in the current year budget, we've really taken a lot of time to review and assess everything that we're doing compared to what the budget was set at the beginning of the year before we got here. And also things that we can do in our current year to make that perform as best as we can, and some considerations for the coming year. All of this is, you'll see some updates, some things we're still waiting on, some information from the state on, some things that we're already able to do, and our goal is in the next couple of weeks to start putting this together. We know we provided some projections in earlier meetings, and we continue to update those going forward every month. So there's a number of measures listed here that we've put into place in this current fiscal year. Obviously, there were a lot, every time you build a budget, you put a certain number of assumptions into that budget, whether those are based on enrollment or attendance and things of that nature. And so we know a lot of decisions were made at the end of last fiscal year in preparation for this budget year that we really needed to review and take a thorough look at. And also just because a lot of things have changed in addition to the continuing impact of COVID on enrollment and attendance. So we wanted to update you briefly on each of these items. If you haven't heard about the importance of attendance, we've really tried to make sure you have. So I want to thank the principals and Katie and the communications team for trying to get out the message about how important attendance is. We know that coming back from spring break, we always have those experiences around holidays where we may have lower attendance. And this is a huge driver of our funding formula. We've gone into great detail on this in several previous presentations, but we're going to continue to talk about this. This is something you're going to continue to hear because it is so critical to our funding. And so you may recall from prior communication that our
budget was built on a higher enrollment than we actually experienced this current year. And so that's not uncommon across districts across the state. But in addition to that, the budget was built on an attendance rate of 97%. Anybody know what our attendance rate was the Friday before spring break? It was not pretty. So in addition to the fact that we normally don't achieve 97% on a good day, we've also had the impact of COVID and things like that on our attendance rate. So earlier in the year, we discussed the fact that after the first 6 weeks, we were estimating about a $529,000 loss in our current budget based on that lower enrollment and the first 6 weeks attendance rate. At that time, you may recall that TEA came out with some communication about what an adjustment could look like for school districts because a hold harmless, as it was termed earlier, was no longer allowed by the legislature. So as we looked at that, there was an adjustment that they would make potentially if our last 18 weeks of attendance was at a higher rate than our first 6 weeks. There's a calculation by which they would adjust that rate. At that time, we did that cost estimation, and it looks like we could regain maybe $70,000 of that based on the first 6 weeks, and we continued to monitor our attendance going forward. Unfortunately, our first 18 weeks started when? About Omicron. So unfortunately, the attendance rates were not in our favor at that time, and that was, again, similar across the state. So the state came back and said, we're going to have to do something else. You may see on this slide that the House Public Education Committee members sent a letter to TEA within the last week, asking the commissioner to provide a hold harmless to attendance for the 21-22 school year. And they're wanting to base that off the 18-19 attendance rate because of all the implications that have occurred to school districts related to COVID. So this is an important, a really critical issue for us specifically, and again, for school districts across the state. So we're continuing to monitor this and calculating what the potential could be. But again, at this point, we know that a letter was issued to TEA last week on behalf of the House Public Education Committee, and we wait to hear more on what the outcome of that might be. One of the other things that we've continued to do is monitor positions. So you hear a lot about what we're analyzing. One of the things that we've been able to really do, especially as Anna has joined the leadership team, is look at each open position that we have. We don't necessarily immediately post those positions. We review each and every one of them. We look at what, if they're truly needed, do we have to have them by the end of the year? Can we wait? And so those are some of the things that obviously, because staffing is 88% of our budget, we want to be just thinking about it before we put any positions out to be posted. We're also doing a monthly revenue and expenditure review procedure, which I've probably driven one of my staff members crazy creating every month because it's a lot of pages, but it's the most useful way that we can provide information to all of our department and campus leaders on our financial performance. So it breaks down every single code of revenue and expenditures across the district, and we provide this every month. We provide it to all of our leaders so that they can review it. And then we look at simple things like a calculation. Some of the things that we did this year were new. There have been questions about things like changes to the Lovejoy Scholar Program or transportation. There's a lot of things that have changed. So we had to look at each one of these and what projections were put into the budget going into this year and how we're performing. So we're continuing to monitor each of those items and bringing forth any amendments that are necessary as a result. An additional item is a review of overtime expenditures. So you've probably heard me speak about how we want to handle bad weather days and makeup days. So what occurs typically is when we have a bad weather makeup day for auxiliary or hourly staff members, oftentimes there aren't enough days left in their staff calendar to make that up during a 5-day week. So if we require them to make up that day, they have to come in on a 6th day, which then triggers overtime cost, often without really having a viable task for them to perform. So I want to thank the board and the community for supporting waiving a couple of those days that could have been quite costly to us if we had required people to come in on Saturday on an hourly rate to make those up. In addition, when we look at our graduation practices over the past several years, we required 100% of our staff members across the district to attend graduation, which is very atypical. And for us, because that is an additional day on the calendar, cost us about $40,000 in hourly costs that we could avoid if we're not requiring non-essential staff to be there. And the last thing I listed on this slide is that we're reviewing our end of year spending procedures. This is about the time of year that we start putting out, notices about how we're going to close out this fiscal year. We need to start looking at any other required expenditures you need to be doing, cleaning up open POs, closing out accounts, that type of thing. So we'll begin that process shortly. We definitely had our staff busy across the board with zero-based budgeting before spring break. And so this will be our next kind of measure on that side. You probably heard something about ESSER, and Lovejoy ISD is eligible for a very small amount of what is called ESSER supplemental funds for the next 2 years. And we were also eligible to apply for a COVID grant, the health support grant. So I want to thank Sancy. We've moved, so I don't know where anybody is, for her support in that and submitting that grant as well. And essentially that gives us the opportunity to get reimbursement from the state for COVID-related expenditures, whether that be extra custodial supplies, testing. I have a very strong feeling that any opportunity that comes across that says the word grant on it, Jennifer's going to be asking somebody if we can go after these funds. So it is an opportunity to grab some of those. We never really know until we submit them exactly what they'll reimburse us back for, but we are definitely heavily in the process of that. An additional item is as we reviewed our audit results back in October, there were some highlights that were requested on behalf of our auditor, just in terms of procedural recommendations. So do we really look at our special revenue areas? Are we paying attention to those? Are we looking at our required program intent code spending? And so we've made some changes in that way just to shore up some of that oversight and documentation. And last but not least, this was a more recent development. So as I began to look at some of our property value studies, those come out about this time of year, the process starts beginning with the state level. School districts in the state of Texas have an opportunity to review their property value study or do a property value study and appeal if they believe their values could be argued to the favor of the district, which could result in an adjustment to your state funding for prior years. I've done this in other districts I've been a part of. There are a number of districts surrounding us. You'll see them listed on the right hand of this slide that take advantage of these services. And so we looked at several different firms that do this type of work, identified the one that is very successful in this area. And so we are going to engage in reviewing this information with this firm. And then they'll file for that appeal on behalf of the district. So we're estimating at this time that could generate maybe $60,000 in funding from prior years, probably something that would come out in the fall, maybe a bit later, and we could continue to appeal those value studies going forward. So again, those are just sharing some information on items that we've done relative to the budget as it was created this year and measures we've taken. And then as we look to 22-23, we are very much in the process of reframing our story focused on these 3 areas of legacy of excellence, future-ready students, and financial sustainability. This is a slide we've shared a few times on the budget development process, and so I've just highlighted where we are in March. As I said before, the departments and campuses submitted their zero-based budgets prior to spring break, and so hopefully that helped them enjoy their spring break a little bit better. But I will say, they did an excellent job of getting that work done, and so we're really pleased to work with them on that. Obviously, there's some updates coming to the board this month, and so we're looking forward to continuing that development around all the potential aspects of the 22-23 budget. So as we look at that, there are some considerations that we've discussed, and I think some of those items have been mentioned. There's lots of developing discussion that we started about in November. But as we look at some of the heavy levers, one of the questions I get a lot of times is, where's the big buckets? Like we've got to identify where our biggest impact could be, simply because we just have a lot of room to make up. Our work is not yet complete to financially recover. For those of you that have been to prior board meetings, you've heard me talk about our lack of sufficient fund balance and what that means in terms of making payroll and things like that. So when we look at our next year's budget, we have to identify what those big items are for consideration. Because 88% of our budget is staffing, we do have to look at the efficiency of our staffing models. So most districts have standards that they have in place related to developing an intentional instructional model and developing your staffing model to align with that. So that's something that we are reviewing. The district did have an outside firm do obviously a staffing survey, but then the work begins on the internal side of reviewing that information and seeing what could potentially be done to become more efficient. That may include the administration of the master schedule that drives a lot of the staffing requirements. So that's going to be reviewed as well. And also the cost of subs and guest educators. So we're going to review all those aspects. So that's a big chunk of what is being done right now is that further analysis on staffing. A second piece you'll see there is program reviews. So this could encompass and does encompass many things, whether it's the development of the Child Development Center and this kind of newly transformed program, our transportation fees, Lovejoy Scholars, extracurricular programs. We're going to turn over every leaf. We're looking at making sure that each of those models is functioning as was intended when it was generated. Oftentimes, districts may generate a new program, but we need to go back and look at, is that achieving what the goal was intended to be? And reviewing any of those fees for non-curricular programs that should be reassessed if they've not been looked at. The next item is compensation. So we have done an equity and market assessment on our current compensation with our existing staff. I was very pleased to hear that that was something that the administration and board heads opted to do before I arrived. It's definitely something that districts should continue to assess. So we brought that information forward several months ago, and an additional item in addition to the salary equity and market assessments, which is really generally more your non-teaching positions, was a stipend review. And so, and some of this will be detailed in more presentations coming later this evening, but just making sure that we're aligning everything that we're doing with the intentional models that we have in place. We're also looking at other potential sources for funding. So back to the G word that nobody wants to hear me say again. We did share lots of opportunities. We're looking at every potential grant that we could for any type of funding. Some we find out that we're not very eligible for because of our low number of economically disadvantaged students, but we do review each one of those opportunities. The zero-based budgeting process has been extremely helpful. I'm just really pleased with the work that we've been able to do around that. And then last but not least, looking at our tax rate and any implications from potential changes to that and what that would mean to next year's budget. So that gives you a brief summary of all the items, kind of those big rocks that we're looking at for next year. I also wanted to give you good news. On Thursday, we do have an interview with TEA. Lovejoy ISD was selected as a shortlisted for interview for the Strategic Compensation Grant. So this is a competitive fellowship grant that would allow the district, if awarded, to hire personnel essentially in-house to help develop teacher compensation programs. So we know that teacher compensation is extremely important. We know we have limited resources. This would give us an opportunity to have somebody to come alongside us and help develop some robust programs around that. And there is some state funding available for some of those programs. So again, this would just give us an opportunity to have somebody come in and assist us with that internally. So if we have any updates on that, of course, we'll bring that forward to you. I also want to applaud the work of the Financial Sustainability Committee. So you can see that they have been in a number of meetings so far this year. The last meeting was on February 8th, where we did a deep dive on expenditure, staffing, and compensation. And we have another meeting tomorrow evening in which we'll do some deep dives into some functional areas that they've identified that we need to look at in terms of those levers for next year. I'm really looking forward to the work that they've done. It's just a phenomenal group. And so their next meeting after tomorrow night will be on April 12th. And this committee that's devised of lots of community members, parents, a few staff members, they'll be generating some information to bring back to the board at their April 12th meeting to the board workshop on May 9th. So that again will be a part of that budget development process for next year. So these are the subtopic groups that the Financial Sustainability Committee has identified. And this is much neater than the Post-it notes that we used a lot of Post-it notes to generate these topics. So what we did was really a very organic exercise to ask questions and then kind of group each of those questions into topic groups. And so those final topic groups are revenue generation, efficiency measures, program analysis, and legacy of excellence. And we truly believe that each of these is extremely important and cannot stand alone. And there are several subtopics within each of those that you can kind of see that resulted in the grouping there. And so again, this next meeting tomorrow evening, the Financial Sustainability Committee members will receive kind of a brief overview of each of those 4 topics and then do a deep dive to generate the recommendations at the April meeting. And so again, I know there's been a lot of activity going on, so there's kind of an overview of where we are currently as we look towards next year's budget development. Any questions?
Curious on what the committee, just any highlights that surprised you, that areas that they focused on more, or any surprises, or?
That's a good question. I think a couple of my big takeaways would be, number one, that we have an incredible community. And some of that was reflected in the earlier comments, just people who are extremely intelligent and giving and caring about their community, and wanting to come around situations that aren't always easy to talk about or figure out. So that has been one of my biggest takeaways. And then as we dived into a lot of data, lots of different information, like any of us, we can kind of go down lots of different ideas. And we've gone through the whole iteration of, well, maybe we should start a program where we're selling, this or that or the other thing to try to make more money, because we're just trying to come up with anything we possibly can to generate revenue or become more efficient. But the group has done a really good job of kind of beginning the work of boiling all these huge ideas. And you need to do that. You need to go through the process of identifying everything and anything that can be done, turn over every rock and look at it. And so now I just think it's amazing. Even being able to kind of funnel those into 4 groups was really a heavy lift.
So I'm curious, you spoke about attendance at the beginning. Since you've implemented some of these things, are we seeing any improvement to attendance?
It is still a challenge. I'm not sure that spring break was a great opportunity to review it. And so we actually had some discussions, was that earlier today? I don't know what day it is, about how we might look at different avenues of getting that communication out, because we've talked about it a lot at board meetings. We've talked about it in Financial Sustainability Committee. We've had parent emails. So we started that conversation about what else can we do? What other modes of communication or groups can we talk to? Because I'm not sure that we're really getting to the folks that can make that change, right? So that's definitely a continuing discussion. It's hard to say until we have a full 6 weeks, what our progress is, but I think there's still quite a bit of room to be made up.
What was the number on Friday? Or if you're willing to, were we at least in the 90s?
I think it was just below 90s. Low 90s.
On the school property audit that you talked about, what's the negatives to that? Why wouldn't school districts do that? Are there negatives to the community members? Does it change what they're paying?
No, it doesn't change. That's a good question. It doesn't change anything to the community. The only thing that changes is the state funding that we could have received. And so we're basically saying to the state, no, we should have received more money from you this particular year. To be honest, I was surprised that we hadn't done that in the past, because there really isn't much of a downside. To be honest, initially when I got here, I thought about filing it myself and had contacted and gotten some information and realized why nobody else does it themselves, because it's just very time consuming. So essentially we do not pay that firm unless they get money back for us.
Go back. How many years can we go back?
3.
Yeah,
And so they'll rotate, and you get 3 appeals on any given year. So even if we appeal this year and we don't get it, they'll go back again to that same, 3 years
As long as we're
until.
on record in a
Mhm.
given year.
So
Yeah, I knew it was under 90. It was 87% attendance on the Friday before spring break.
87.9.
So the reason we get, if we do this property value analysis or review by this law firm, the reason we're going to see more dollars is because of the golden and copper pennies. This is something that's outside of attendance levels.
It is outside of attendance levels. They're going to argue the actual value of the property, not the rate.
Right.
So, yeah.
I just want to make sure people realize this is something that's going to benefit us outside of the ADA. So
Yes.
Go for everything we can.
Mhm.
Thank you for the updates.
Thank you.
Next item is preliminary staffing considerations for 22 and 23. Ms. Koenig.
Yes, that's me. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to briefly just talk about some staffing considerations for next year as we're getting closer to June. First of all, we just pulled a report and we're looking at staffing counts 2021 versus 2022 from February. And I know we closed Lovejoy Elementary, and so employee counts did go down by 65 employees. However, one thing that I was personally glad to see is that as far as the teaching themselves, it looks like we lost 8 teachers, 6 at elementary and 2 secondary teachers, which is great because we're still focused on kids and doing what's best for kids. Also looking at central admin and who's actually in the red building, looking at the administration, coordinators and directors, those also went down proportionately. So we were glad to that we are making differences over here in this building too. There is one number, the support, where it says 30, where we lost 30. That's quite a few vacancies there. That's our custodial support, child nutrition, but those areas that they just have not been filled. We're currently trying to recruit for those areas. So if you know anyone, let us know. We're definitely wanting to find some supports there. So just wanted to share some of that information with you to start off with before we get into staffing. The next one, I've just broken these down to talk about some efficiency measures, some things that that as we dig deeper, as Jennifer referred to, and she talked quite a few about several of these, but just some more information that I noticed just to work on efficiency with our staffing, because of course it's 88% of our budget. So I want to make sure that we are very intentional with our staffing and what we there. So we're going to first talk, she talked a little about master schedules. And just as a reminder, currently Sloan, Willow Springs and Lovejoy High School are doing the 6 of 8 model. So basically their teachers are teaching out of 8 classes a day, their teachers are teaching 6. And what we find is, the more classes you offer, the more staff you need. And there's been a lot of discussion about, should we go to 6 of 7, 7 to 8, 6.5 to 8, which would be 6 on core teachers. And then, so that our core teachers would teach 6, and then our electives may teach 7 of 8. I'm definitely not the expert on master scheduling. I'm here to help staff those positions and making sure that we're staffing with the most highly qualified people and meeting the needs of our kids. So, but I know later tonight, Kevin and Dr. Tinsley and Sancy will be talking to you a little bit more about that. The other thing that we've talked a lot about is program model and determining, what our program model is and scheduling that. That's for athletics, GT, any of those, and making sure that, once again, that we're very intentional with our program model and that we're able to support that as much as we can there. So a little bit more on, and they're going to be sharing some information on program model too. And of course, course request. And course request actually is what drives our master schedule. Our students, they will actually, when they fill out those course requests, are we, are we offering courses that they want to take? Are we looking at a minimum number of requirements in those courses there? One example also, when we look at course requests, if we have 175 students that want AP English, and we know, if we divide that by a ratio of 28, that means we probably need about 6.3 teachers, or we need actually 6 teachers to teach it, because we're going to round up, then we have another period that we have to cover. So just thinking in terms of that way, when you're looking at course requests and how many students are actually requesting that AP English course. Something else, just wanted to talk a little bit about is units of time. And right now we have the way our schedule is working at all of our schools. We have, our coaches coming down and teaching PE. Okay. What I realized as we started looking through those master schedules is that PE teacher, that coach may have to have a travel time. So they may come over, teach one, have a travel time back, have a conference time. So it's possible they're only teaching 2 or 3 courses, where their specialty or expertise is at the high school coaching. And looking at that, that's why we're one of the things we're considering, of course, is that a PE teacher full-time at the elementary. So that also hinders us, because remember, we all start school at a different time. And everyone, all those coaches need a conference time and planning time and those types of things, but just really thinking through what that travel time is and how those units of time. I've also noticed as we're looking at some of that master scheduling, we have some teachers that are doing administrative or clerical responsibilities, and that's probably not the best use of their time. Their time is working with kids, and looking at those responsibilities and where we could use those, where we could pick up some of those responsibilities, either in the office with your clerical, or that should be probably given to an administrator on the campus. So how we're using just those small units of time, and how often they're teaching, how many classes or a period they're teaching during that day. Some other just some inconsistencies was as we look at staff and we look at where they're assigned is their location code. We have some teachers that are really assigned here, but they're on the campus most of the day, and that can cause some confusion, like who do they report to? Are we utilizing them in their, in their profession the way we need to? But looking at that location code and making sure that if they're supporting the campus, we have them coded to the campus and are supporting our kiddos there. And then of course we get to class size. Pre-K through 4, that's pretty easy. It's 22-to-1. But then as we go up from 5th grade, have we determined a student-teacher ratio? Are we looking at 25? Are we looking at 28? And looking at really that caseload of that teacher overall, what is our expectation there in order to meet the needs of our students in the classroom and to support kids fully the way we want them to? What do those ratios look like in each class? Something else that I noticed is the minimum number of students in a class. Should we set some parameters in order for a class to make, we have classes that have 2 children in them, 4 children in them. What that also tells me is that's probably maybe not a popular course. Should we be offering something else there? Or is it just the path? And all of these cannot be done immediately. This is going to take several years because we have kids on graduation pathways and that may need to continue the path. But these are just some things that we definitely need to think about and talk about as we look for next year and some staffing.
Can I have a question?
Yes, you
So I'm
can.
assuming when you were talking about this really small, though you're talking about high school only in that
No,
setting, or-
there's some at other levels too.
Okay.
And I don't think it was 2. I think it was probably 4 or 5.
Okay.
Okay, good question. The other thing I wanted to talk about was just compensation and basically salary and contracted services. So for contracted services, usually we pay a premium on them. They're usually paid an hourly rate or by the job. And sometimes you can't help it. Like it might be an LSSP, a speech teacher, where we have someone that maybe left in the middle of the year, or we had more students qualify and we need to provide those services. And sometimes that can't be helped. but we want to make sure that we anticipate those needs and that we get the most qualified person, because and we want them to be our employee, not contracted services out. So thinking about that, thinking about part-time employees and, if they work 20 hours, we're responsible for their benefits and different costs that are associated with part-time employees. And also looking at retire and rehire employees, those that retire and then we hire them back to, how many of those do we have? Are we looking at those carefully, and do we need them? Many of them are experts, and we do. So something else that came up as we're studying the master schedule and staffing is permanent guest educators. Currently, we spend about $200,000 on permanent guest educators because we have them at every level. When we pulled some information, Jennifer pulled some information from us, and a lot of times they weren't used because a permanent guest educator should sub first and then do other duties on that campus because they're assigned to the campus. What we figured out is sometimes that's not happening. They're helping with other things, and I'm sure that there are things that the work needs to get done, but we're not exactly always putting them in that substitute position, and then we're paying for a sub where we have a permanent guest educator. That makes sense there. And some of the other things that I looked at was like extra duty pay, and we looked at like supplemental pay, and usually for supplemental pay, there's lots of different definitions of it. In the past, where I looked at supplemental pay, is we've paid that more for an event. Like if you hosted a UIL event and you were the director of the UIL event, you would get supplemental pay when that event occurred. Okay. During COVID, those events didn't occur, so that person didn't get paid. Or, for example, and it's usually not a lot of money. It's usually less than $250 or so. But just looking at that, I know if you didn't go to camp that year, that the person that takes 5th grade to camp, they might not get paid because we didn't have it. But looking at that pay structure, and of course stipends. I am going to recommend that we do a stipend study this next year and look at stipends and determine basically how many kids are participating in that for those extra duties for that teacher to get paid, and looking at that, how many meetings there are, those types of things, but looking at stipends and determining if all the stipends are necessary. Years ago, I had a stipend for a cell phone. That no longer is necessary. That's part of the job. But I had a superintendent that wanted us 24/7, and so we all had a cell phone. We had a small stipend for it. So the other thing is extra days for personnel. Most teachers are 187 contract. We do have some teachers that are on lengthier contracts, 195, 197. At this point, it looks like they're at the end of the year, not sure exactly, but, just wanted to evaluate that and look at, what are they doing during those extra days, because we're paying them their daily rate for that. Is that needed? Those types of things. So just reviewing those. And Jennifer had mentioned the overtime, the 48-hour work week, which is coming up this year too, in May and Saturday. And the other thing that we wanted to, I wanted to talk with you about is just certifications and licenses. Most districts have both their fine arts and their coaches have CDLs, and so they can be a bus driver. Right now we have some situations where we need a bus driver, and we may have a coach lead a classroom that he's teaching to go drive a bus, and that's probably not the best use of him. We probably want him there teaching there, but just getting CDLs for our coaches and fine arts so they can drive the buses, or they may have to, a lot of times on a Friday night, we may have a bus driver that is sitting in the parking lot for 4 hours on a football game. So making the most of our money there. And teachers looking at certifications, we want to make sure, I just pulled a report and reviewed all of the teacher certifications. So if there are other opportunities and other classes they could teach, that we, give them those opportunities. Or if we need to cover, for example, used to be called composite science. I think it's physical science now, and life science. Are they willing to pick up that other class so we don't have to pay someone if they have that available, or we don't have to give them pay someone else to pick up that period, which I think is kind of currently is what we're doing. And some of our next steps is just to review master schedules. We're going to go through those again. Set class size, caseload ratios, and the minimum number for course offerings. Review ways to maximize course offerings for students. Are we, giving them the opportunities that and courses they want to take? As Jennifer said, once again, we're assessing the need before adding new positions. I'm also keeping a list because I know there's been a lot of talk about attrition. And as those resignations are coming in, so we can model so that we can monitor that every week. And that's something that we're doing. And then also something else I wanted to say is provide opportunities to grow our own. And we can really do that, especially in like if, a librarian, if we have a teacher that wants to be a librarian, or if we has someone that wants to be a diag, there's some cohorts and things that we can help get them and, contact them, but to grow our own. Questions? You're going to hear some more details tonight with some of the other folks too.
I have just a question real quick.
Yes.
around the 6 of 8, 7 of 8, 6.5 of 8. What goes into, does the master schedule help drive the decision points around that? Or is there
So-
feedback from teachers? Is that?
Usually
So how does
it's
that work?
feedback from teachers. In some districts, for example, like I know like some districts, they may just do 5 to 6, and because it really depends. When you have more, you need more teachers. I think that's really a decision that was probably made. And Kevin, you've been here at the camp at the.
I think it's a balancing act.
Yeah.
As far as what we want to consider, the first one being the options that we want to offer to kids.
Like, did you want to offer?
So that's going to drive the number of students who get different experiences in their electives classes. It's going to either positively or potentially negatively impact students in our fine arts programs or our other robotics or electives because they just don't have the hours in the day or the classes in the day to be able to choose. Another thing is obviously it's a budgetary decision. So it's those are really the two things that drive the decision as to where you go. That's the framework of the master schedule.
So remind me of Willow Springs. We went from 8 to 7 2 years ago. And then last year we put back 8. So do we know the budget impact of that decision during that time period? Or if we don't have it, can we obtain that?
One of the struggles that we had in estimating things is really the only way that we can do it is to calculate what a number of FTEs we may have been able to absorb through attrition or something like that. So the struggle is, I guess we would have to go back and look at if any positions change as a direct result of that.
You go to an 8-period day, you need more teachers.
Yeah.
I know that when we went back to an 8-period day, we hired, I believe, 4 or 5 additional teachers.
I know that we were given figures previously, recollecting, probably not a productive exercise to recollect it. I remember basically what it was, but might be helpful for us to understand that so we can evaluate, determine, help understand that.
I would also add to the teacher's well-being for that 8-period day, the 2 periods, one gives them the ability to collaborate and work together.
Mhm.
And then one also gives them the ability to connect with parents and students if needed. So the quality of their life and teaching is impacted greatly because I remember when we took that period away, hearing a lot of how hard that was and what a difference that
Because you
made
still have to
in
plan for the classes that they teach regardless of how they teach. Planning or.
right. And then being able to collaborate with your team can make all the difference for yourself and your kids. Yeah.
You also want to understand the impact to the kids. When we made that change, there was also significant impact to the fine arts programs, maybe to sports too, where the number of participants.
We're still trying to build our numbers, especially at the middle school level. We still are feeling kind of everything. To 7 just for 1 year. Our numbers are still pretty low. They're regenerating, if you will, but we're still having every opportunity that we provide has a cost, and that's what we're all talking about right here. But just wanted to bring that student impact back into the picture.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
I think I'm.
Before we go to item 10, we'll take a quick 2 or 3 minute restroom break. Thank you.
That's the authority you have. Everyone has to go to the restroom. I was like, I have to have, like, I'm cheering my, I was like, Carrie Bradshaw. I was like, no, well.
Caroline was calling earlier. She was in the queue. She was scared. Volleyball. She was doing a shoot.
I love it here. It's really
I think it's less.
We do too, and I like that I think that we, we can be taking some notes too, anything else.
I have 5 days off. Maybe I'm at 60. Before they close.
Thank you for the bio break. Yeah, thank you, thank you. Me too, but I was just gonna get up and you didn't do it.
All right, we call the meeting back to order. Thank you all for indulging us for a moment.
Okay, Lovejoy Scholars. So just going to take a few moments to share more information about our scholar program. I did on that first slide, you will see, once again, just looking at just some revenue generating there. If the 75% of the returning scholars and charging the application fee, and then the different tuition rates there, what they would yield, 3,000, 7,000, 9,000. And then what the totals would be with tuition and application for those that are returning there. So I've shared some of that information. Then currently we have 22 Lovejoy Scholars graduating. So we just looked at that number. And once again, some different financials there for if we charge the same, price for each of those, or if we divided it K6 and 7, 12, 11, and 11. So just the amounts there, and, very much different amounts determining on exactly what the recommendation is there. I wanted to go on to the next slide because there was a question brought up last time about student funding and what our district allotment was. Our district allotment is 6160. And then we looked at district allotment plus tier 1 and tier 2, which is really about 7,200. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. And that includes the small mid-size adjustment and of course, and school safety, which there's some fees there. And then just breaking it down, just for examples, random examples, it has the district allotment there. And then of course, the small mid-size adjustment, revenue, school safety, and then what funds we would get from if a child was GT, and then the WADA, which was $7,222 compared to student 2. Student 2, that child is enrolled in 2 or more CTE courses, so we get a little bit more money there. And so a little bit over $8,000 there. And then of course, student 3 was just showing a child that may be in speech therapy, and then a special education, a student there. So those are just, but I think the safe bet is right at 7,200 there.
Can I interrupt you, Anna?
Yes, ma'am.
So mainstream, I've not seen that term before. What does
That's
that,
special education.
that's what that means. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just
Yeah.
connecting the
Good
dots.
question.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen the term WADA.
Oh, that is the adjustment.
The
Oh,
weighted
never mind.
average daily.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've seen it too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jennifer could probably really explain that well. I just know it's the state adjustment. So.
For the benefit of everyone here, explain the difference between the allotment and what tier 1 and tier 2 is real
Okay.
quick. Just a brief.
Okay, the district allotment is just what the state gives us. The tier 1 and tier 2 are services that we provide. So tier 1 would be GT. It would be CTE, general education program. Tier 2 would be 504, dyslexia. Tier 3 would be more special education, speech, those. So there's different levels of tiers of student support. And there's basically a cost associated with that.
So the 6160, is that consistent amongst every district in the state?
Yes, from what I
And then
understand
the small mid-size adjustments,
for us.
the variation that applies to districts based on growth factors and sizes, correct?
Yes. But as I said, I think the 7,200 is
Right.
where we would be. Okay.
So this is the money the state would pay for these students, these different types,
Correct.
not what they cost.
Correct.
to
Yes,
serve
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah.
It's what the state's giving.
What the state is giving
I
us.
just want to clarify.
Yes,
'cause
what
it
the
gets
state is
confusing.
giving us. Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, what the state is giving us.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay. The next thing we were talking about is a timeline. I know it will be at the March 28th board meeting that we're hoping to seek approval for the Lovejoy Scholars. Then we would have applications open for pretty much everyone. And then hoping to get our returning scholar applications in quickly. It is first come, first serve. So I want to make sure everyone knows that. But because of course we would give priority to those returning scholars there, and then provide returning scholars an acceptance notice. And then of course the new applications due at the end of May. And then depending on, if we have how many spots we have open, I guess, or there we might have to open applications again. And so we looked at that. And then another kind of just repeating the cycle, another cycle. And then of course, when with a collection fee in July, and then of course in November too. Okay, just a timeline there. Also looking as far as application committee, we would definitely have representation from all of these departments, student services, curriculum instruction, and special programming. We would want them on the committee there as going through the application process. And once again, looking at academic performance, attendance, student conduct, discipline, we put parent involvement. We just want to make sure that you're going to be part of this Lovejoy community. We want you here and involved in our community there. So it's a unique place, and want to make sure you're part of it. And then of course, also looking at priority, where we give priority is at current little Lovejoy scholars who are currently here, siblings and current students and residents at that time. Okay, so we give priority to those. And then we also talked about some hardships or extenuating circumstances, and that might be a loss of job, a loss of a parent or guardian, divorce, medical, those types of things. So some discussion around there. What are some extenuating circumstances there that we would consider? And then of course, just getting the word out, marketing communication timeline, posting everything on our website, doing a mailer, information shared with campuses, scheduling Why Lovejoy Night, we hope to do that. Also giving a list of events. I know, didn't see Cindy here, but we have our STEM program on a Saturday, but just, making those available to people that they want to come and they want to see what we're about, that we invite them to those events and they're aware of those. So we'd love to have them there. And so there's kind of a marketing communication timeline there. Other questions?
Yeah, so I want to go to the considerations chart.
Okay.
So you said March 28th, we're going to decide on this program, right?
Correct.
So when are we going to talk about these considerations? Are we doing that tonight? Or are we?
Mhm.
Do it
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay.
Right now.
I was hoping so. Yeah, I
So
thought
there's
I
a
could have-
consideration for returning, and then of course there's a consideration for new scholars there.
So I'm very concerned about this 75% number that we're using. I know we have to put some
agree.
hypotheticals in there, but
Mhm.
I don't know that we can have any confidence that that's the right number. I don't know that it's the wrong number either, but it's a number. I guess one thing I've been looking at is kind of break evens as we think through this. If we were to get 100% returning by just keeping the program the same, that nets a certain amount of dollars of 300 rough
Mhm.
current scholars times the 7,200
Correct.
conservative
Mhm. Mhm.
state allotment, which we know there's a little bit more that
Mhm.
would be there as well, but we use that versus some break-even percentage if we get less, but we're charging the people that do come back
More.
more. So all of that has to be part of the consideration, right? If we're strictly looking at it from a financial standpoint, there's a break even on the dollars.
Correct.
Now, I don't want to strictly look at it from a financial standpoint because we know it affects
Kids.
families and kids and people that have invested in the community and changed their circumstances. So I would be more inclined to, I'm not saying not charge a fee for the program. I know we didn't charge it this year because we thought we might not have the ability to charge it based on pending legislation. But I would be inclined for the existing scholars to charge a much lower fee, hoping to retain more of those students than charging a higher fee and potentially getting a lot less coming back.
You know, I think there's a lot of preemptive discussions around this, and we're attempting to be very transparent with our thoughts. And we have to vet out every circumstance, and we're trying to do that in a public fashion. So as we talk about these tuition levels, certainly no decisions have been made. That's why we're deliberating and discussing it. So, you know, I share that same mindset that I would like to honor those scholars. We've got to strike a balance that is going to be appropriate for, one, to maximize retention, but two, protect what we have. And we're not talking about this because we don't have to make changes. We have to make changes. Maybe not to this, but in general, what we've done last year won't work next year. So we have to make sure that we solve the equation. And I think given the road we've been down, there's perhaps a balance here that is similar to what you're describing that would allow that to happen. So I share that same feeling. 75%, there's no way to really know, in my opinion, what that number is.
I don't know that even if we put out a poll, I don't know that it would.
Who's going to say, yes, I want to pay, right?
I don't know that there's an accurate way other than hindsight to know what the number's going to be. So I think that 70, if we had a program that was charging and we had roughly 100 and we've tripled that number in 1 year where we didn't charge, I think if we charge anywhere close to what it used to be, 75% is unrealistic.
Yeah, I can't argue that logic. And I don't think that we necessarily, I don't think that 75% number necessarily is driven towards $9,000.
Right.
But we have to have numbers to evaluate. So
I think something to consider too are our current students in district and any fees they're potentially paying. I feel like it would only be fair if we would ask the same of people coming at the benefit of being in Lovejoy, not at the expense of our current in-district students as well. So I don't know what, I mean, a bus fee, I know for sure is something we charge. So I feel like we would at least be fair by charging that or whatever fees our current in-district families are having to pay.
Mandatory fees.
Mandatory fees. Yeah. I think it would be fair to ask that.
Suggestions?
In addition to, I mean, stepping away from the financial side of the equation, it looks like this schedule that you're proposing would give current Lovejoy scholars the first shot.
Correct.
We're not going to reopen this to whoever first come, first serve. We're going to make sure that our
They have a
current
place.
students have a priority.
Yes, sir.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
And it's a consideration you definitely should give.
And I like that it's urgent. I mean,
Right.
it's
quick.
and one, it's what families need to
Need to
know,
know,
and
right.
then what we need to know. So I like that too. I like that we're going to move on this. Once we figure it out.
How are, I mean, if we're going to be considering action at the next board meeting, what is your process between now and that next meeting to present a formal plan for us to act on? What are the next steps that you're considering to figure out where that right balance is?
What we will do is take your feedback
Mhm.
and any additional information that you would like us to put together. We will put that together and send that to you. And then that will be part of a formal presentation at our next regular board meeting prior to bringing forward a recommendation for your consideration. That is if you want to continue to move forward on the timeline that we've proposed.
I think we need to do that first, students
Okay.
and our families. I want us to adhere to the timeline.
Okay.
At least that's my personal ask. I think
I don't think it can wait.
We have to know.
every one of these
We don't
kids is
want this-
important to
And
us.
it's not fair to the families that are here that they want to know. We all want to,
Yeah.
we want to turn the page and move forward. I agree.
I
I don't
agree.
think a huge tuition for the folks that are here is the right thing. I do think, as Amy said, there needs to be something. You know, I don't know that 7 or 9 is something.
Yeah.
I would be more towards the 3-ish. But that's just Ann Smith talking. I want to take care of these folks, but I also want people to feel we're all contributing, we're all giving up things, it's unfortunate we're having to even,
And this
do
is not the
this.
only change we're
no,
going to make.
everybody's feeling it.
Well,
I
There's
mean,
going to be other things that we do in conjunction with this
Sure.
to evaluate all.
And I know this is a year-to-year program that we renew each year, but I'd like to see if there was a fee charged that was reasonable, that kept us, that we thought within reason would keep us close to, very near our number that we have now. Some type of, I mean, we can't be having this conversation
Over and
about
over.
tuition in this program every year because they can't
Right, I agree.
plan on that. So, I mean,
Well-
I'm just saying, in our discussions, I'd like to see some type of, here's what it is and here's what it's going to be.
Year after year.
And I don't know if that's possible.
I don't see on the returning, I know we've broken out the possible different fees of elementary versus secondary for new scholars.
Mhm.
Maybe that should be a consideration for returning scholars also, different, like a lower fee for elementary returning versus secondary returning. I wouldn't mind seeing a little
Okay.
bit more hashed out detail on if we charged X dollars, we have higher likelihood of retaining 90%. If we charge
Okay.
Y dollars, we have likelihood of retaining less, but where are those? So we can just, I would
Okay.
like more information than just this one hypothetical to help me think through the process.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I agree that going with last year's tuitions numbers before we made the change to the program is not going to deliver 75%,
Mm-mm.
not even close.
Right.
And on top of that, understanding what lever we're turning so that we can evaluate this program as we're going forward because we're going on a pretty quick calendar.
Mhm.
So we're going to know some of this information before we actually seal the deal on some other items, right? So
Before our budget, yeah.
before our
Their
final
In order
budget.
to give them adequate time to evaluate.
No, I know, we
options,
have to do
reapply
that.
and do
Yeah.
that. We have to do that.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
and that's what I'm saying. That's a good thing. They know, we know, we can start we might actually be able to find out some of these levers.
If we can help more families and still achieve the same revenue in the
Mhm.
district, that's what we want to do.
Right.
Okay.
To Jason's point, I mean, the offerings that the K-4 cost less to educate them, right? The more
Mhm.
offerings we have as you get older,
Correct.
I think that tiered system would be an adequate thing to do to make a separation between each of them.
Okay.
But I would definitely be in favor of not going anywhere near the levels that we
Okay.
have here, to be honest with you.
We'll get that information for you.
After the comparison with Wiley, I have just felt, this is only a feeling, it's not a
Mhm.
analytical thought,
Mhm.
that the 3,000-ish range was appropriate.
Mhm.
I'm not going to say it's perfect for everyone, but if we could extrapolate something around that metric
Okay,
up or down from an elementary to a middle to a high school level.
perfect.
I think it would
Help.
appease my thoughts around where I think we're headed with it. I'd rather not see any, you know, I don't care to see anything over 5
Okay,
at the secondary level, but, and this is only for the existing returners.
right.
The new scholars, we would treat differently,
Okay,
in my opinion, for new applications that weren't returning.
And for your reference to Wiley, they're charging
We're charging $2,000.
2,000.
Across the board, every age, right?
I
That's what
believe
the
so,
slide
yeah.
said, I think.
I think it's
Yeah.
what the slide said.
Yeah.
I also want to see in a proposal, maybe perhaps discounts for siblings and a cap, because people with 3, 4 kids, I mean, you just can't keep going on and on. I think I'd like to consider a proposal for a family cap at a number.
And
Yes.
maybe what the maximum mandatory fee is that an in-district person is paying currently? What,
You would like how many kids they have.
or just
Yeah.
like, you know, a range of what in-district families are paying at their own expense on mandatory fees.
Yeah.
I would also be open to looking at what impact it would have for families that previously were paying at the higher tuition rate. If they could earn some credit for that, what they've already paid into the system. I mean, I'm not trying to give away more money that we don't have, but I mean, think about it. Someone paid for
Could be
5 years at the higher rate, and other people come in for free and get it for free forever. I don't want to, I want to try to be fair to people that have supported and invested within our district.
Okay. Thank you.
Talk about hardships for a second before we move away. I know we were talking about monetary pieces, a couple of things. One is currently, I believe the program allows for folks who are enrolled into their junior year. They're able to finish if they sell their home in their junior year.
Correct. They're senior.
They can return their senior year by filing an application and paying the applicable tuition for a transfer.
Correct.
So one thought is to, given market conditions, this is probably short term with housing values, but we may want to widen the scope of that to allow folks who've been here for a number of years
Okay.
to maybe move that forward to the sophomore year, where they can potentially sell their home and continue to transfer in. If we have a track record with the kid, if we know them, they meet our academic and attendance profiles that
Okay.
we're asked for, then that might be something to consider. The other thing is Little Lovejoy Scholars. So that program, to the extent we have kids that transfer into the district in this program, some incentive for them to continue
Okay.
and for them to start at that lower level, or at that younger level, not lower, but younger.
Okay.
So I don't really have any metrics to give you around that. Just conceptually, I like the idea of having families invested with their kids earlier. And we know that program needs to sustain itself and grow. So perhaps that's an enhancement that might attract folks.
And the Little Lovejoy Scholars, the pre-K program, that remained a tuition-based program even currently,
Yes.
right? We did
Mhm.
not alter
Correct.
that.
What are the figures on that? What's the tuition for that?
Age.
Okay.
And then
I just couldn't remember what it was.
I guess my thought is if they
Yeah.
come in as Lovejoy Scholars, Little Lovejoy Scholars,
And then,
perhaps there's a tuition rate that's lower than the full tuition rate for a new scholar
right. Okay.
because they've invested earlier in the
Yeah.
process. And so
You're trying to incentivize them
To stay.
we need to improve this Little Lovejoy Scholars program. The expectations that were set with us as a board with previously,
Mhm.
have been different than actual
Probably didn't.
experience. And
Okay.
so
For the
just trying to
program.
think of ways to improve
Yeah.
and enhance that and make it more attractive.
Well, and just like the tuition conversation we're having now, the enrollment's driven by the attendance, by the tuition amount, They're connected.
What is the current policy on transfers for employees? And
Free,
is it
free.
free for
It's
that?
free.
Counted as
Enhancement
Employee,
program.
yeah.
And is it, what about extended family? If it has to be a parent, it has to be the direct family?
Have to have an address in the district.
There are some
Unless they're
special
grandparents.
circumstances that have to do with grandparents and the amount of caregiving,
That they have.
and we have that within regulations.
Yeah.
So that's driven by state regulation is how that works?
The grant, yes, there's a, yes.
Basically establish residency through those covenants.
And the total number of current Lovejoy scholars is 331, 330,
341, I believe.
341, and we know 22 are graduating.
Correct.
Cap we put in place last year was
350.
We
So we
shooting
want-
for that same number, I'm guessing 350 cap.
We want to make sure that we're documenting what we want that cap, what y'all are suggesting that cap be next year.
We would probably come back to you and ask you if we wanted to raise it above that. So we would,
That's fine.
Well, some of
That
that's,
was
but
discussion.
you'll have to advise us on that because we won't know what the efficiency. metrics
Yeah,
are.
we will.
Do that.
Yes.
yeah. We'll look at it by grade level after we.
A cap being in place in terms of the language, not to exceed, because of course, we look at that by grade
Grade
level. There are
level.
times where there's not any more room in a grade
Right.
level, right? So
Right.
that grade level is closed. That has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. That gives us the administrative ability to do that on a daily basis.
And we might revisit the demographic study and how we have expected a capacity at each of the different levels.
The
That
range.
will also impact what the total potential delta is in terms of revenue if we make a change. Need to revisit that.
Are you planning to have more detail around the process of
The
the
application.
hardship request?
I think we talked about adding a sentence on there, yes, for about extenuating circumstances.
Well, I just, if we're going to be entertaining the idea of granting hardship situations, I just would want to understand better. And I
What
don't
that
know if
would-
it has to be done at the next meeting, but exactly what the process is. Is there a committee?
Yeah,
Is it-
that'd be brought before the committee.
Right?
So
The,
Same committee.
That does
Same
not all
location.
have to be ironed out at the next meeting, and we already have some drafts in
In
play
place.
of what some of those administrative regulations, including hardships, could look like,
Mhm.
that we will bring forward for your review.
Good discussion. Any other comments? Thank you for the update. Athletic programming considerations for 22-23. Mr. Parker.
Yeah, sticking with the theme of program reviews, we wanted to take a little bit deeper of or more focused approach, I guess, to what this TASB staffing review gave us, information that it gave us a couple of months ago. We want to provide some clarity around it and also look at what efficiencies we can find in our athletic program without sacrificing the experience that kids have, and ensuring that we don't minimize the effectiveness of that our coaches have with our students and our athletes. So I've asked Coach Ross to come up here and help me with this. I'm a little miffed at why he gets dressed up for you guys. When I meet with him, he's not. He's in shorts and athletic clothes. I'm not going to take that personal, but anyways, I'm going to turn it over to him. But I did want to really stress to you that there was some numbers in particular that the staffing review mentioned, such as converting 31 athletic sections to academic sections that we wanted to make sure and highlight and explain to you what those things meant. So I know Coach Ross is going to mention this, but it's not personnel, it's really periods of time, 31 periods of time that we're really talking about converting those to academic periods of time. And we can do that. And this is really going to save us money, and it's going to increase and improve the experience that our kids have in athletics. So it's a win-win really for everybody. So I'm going to turn it over to Coach Rose.
Address for your audience, right? So we did an internal review looking at just athletic staffing and utilization of our athletic periods. In the previous TASB presentation, she talked about athletic sections. An athletic section is one teacher for one class in a day. So for instance, if you had 2 coaches teaching golf, then that would be 2 athletic sections in that one class. So by saying getting rid of 31 sections, you're saying like 31 times a coach is with a group, not necessarily 31 coaches or 31 teams. Make sure that I'm clear on that. I'm really glad I brought this up here because that looks like an eye test. How do on those? So as we look at the strengths of our district and our athletic programs right now, obviously the support that we have in our community from our administration is unbelievable. Because of that support, we have incredibly high numbers in all of our extracurriculars. So we're talking about athletics now. We could be talking about fine arts as well. The two really they go hand in hand. Your support, the guidance, and the leadership that we have in our district, we have great numbers. With those great numbers and supportive coaches and directors that we have in these programs, we've had unbelievable success. Right now, our athletic and fine arts programs, there's something called the Lone Star Cup that recognizes the most elite in the state, and we're winning it right now. So I'm so proud of that's fine arts and athletics. I'm so proud of both groups. And then we're also right now leading the Max Prep Cup, which recognizes the best athletic program in the state. So of course, like I told them all, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. Hopefully we'll keep doing what we're doing, but I'm so proud of them. And those are some of our strengths. The weaknesses right now, we have an inefficient use of some of our staff. Some of these things, obviously, we're driven right now by opportunities presented to us by some things that we can make changes to, positively affect our budget. But I'm going to tell you, this is something that Mr. Parker and I discussed when I first got here. 2 years ago, we were talking about some of these things. Obviously, this is an opportunity to dramatically affect the budget, but it's also an opportunity to fix the work days of some of our coaches and to help them have a greater impact on our students. So we're excited about that. When you look at we just talked a little bit about some of the opportunities. Another piece of it is by utilizing their time more efficiently and effectively, we're going to take them from out behind a windshield and put them in front of kids. And our coaches here, they want to be with the kids. We can't be changing lives and impacting the culture of that campus and that kid if we're not with them. And so that's something that the coaches absolutely want. If we don't do it, what are some of the threats? We're going to lose some of our coaches, especially our middle school situation right now. It's a difficult work day. They're doing an unbelievable job. But there's things that we can do that we can fix today that's going to dramatically affect their ability to make a difference with our kids and just what their workday looks like. Loss of potential student athletes. If they're not connecting, if we're not connecting with them in middle school, then when we get that second chance, or will we? And we want all of our kids, not necessarily to be involved in athletics. I want every kid in Lovejoy to be a leopard in something. And, we can't do that if we're not there to get them plugged in and connected. And then, of course, loss of opportunities to impact the students is the utmost responsibility of our group. We want to be able to do that. So this is some examples of some current coaching schedules. So if you look right now, we have a total of 48 coaches. 20 of them drive every day. So they go from one campus to another campus every single day. On an average, roughly about $150 a month that we're paying them mileage. Those that turn it in. And I can tell many of them don't, and they could. So that gives us roughly $3,000 a month that we're spending on this with just our coaches. So getting back to that section number, that's 17 sections that we're using right now, driving time. You know, if we figure FTE at 6 of 8, we're looking at almost 3 full FTEs of driving, coaches driving from the district. I gave some examples. These are actual coaches. I just don't have their names on here, but you can see, protect the innocent, right? Protect the innocent. So you can see one coach starts out, he's coaching in the morning, okay, but then he's supposed to be at Sloan Creek Intermediate teaching. Well, if you think about the start times of those two, you can see that like him coaching in the morning, but then he's supposed to be teaching. He can't do both at the same time, but that's exactly how he's scheduled right now. There's multiple coaches that are like that. So then he goes from Sloan Creek, then he's supposed to get back and be coaching at the high school. Again, you think about start times and end times, it doesn't work, but that's what we're having to do. We would propose that that coach, that specific coach would just be tied to the middle school in their teaching and in their coaching. Now we have somebody that can be a part of Chris's campus, you know, the faculty, the culture, be able to touch and connect those kids, be a part of just that community of teachers that you have at that campus, and then obviously do a better job at, you know, athletically as well. The second one, very similar, you know, it goes middle school to elementary to high school. Okay, this particular coach counted as a coach in the morning that he could never be at that practice, ever, because he had elementary, an assignment there. The two didn't work. So we were constantly going short. He could be there for the games, but not for practices. And then his day ended over at the high school. So again, think about what that feels like. You're supposed to be at practice. You show up. You have to leave right basically after it gets started. Drive back over to the elementary. Do your job at the elementary. Drive over to the high school. Change again. Meet the kids on the field every single day. That's what that coach is doing. We have it, and we would put that one at the middle school. Another one went middle school to high school to middle school. The periods somewhat aligned because, you know, and I'll tell you this, this would not be possible at all if you didn't have our principals that truly tried to work together and make this thing even feasible. And that's kudos to our principals. And then, of course, the last one, we had a middle school to Sloan Creek to high school again. And they were coaching on both ends of the day, or trying to. You know, this clearly is not something that we want moving forward. I'm just talking about feasibility of effectiveness with our kids in the programs, not to mention the savings that we're talking about. Now, the peer group comparison that TASB brought in, and I used their specific schools so that you can kind of get an apples to apples. If you look at that, you'll see a peer group average and then a Lovejoy ISD. You're going to see that we are slightly below this peer group average. Now, I would say this on this group, and as TASB builds peer groups, they're based on EcoDIS, they're based on student POPs, they're based on all types of factors. Some of which would absolutely play into athletic peer group, many of that wouldn't, you know, but as you look at it, I think it gives a fair assessment considering that's what they used. But you can see we are right in line across the board, slightly below for that peer group. If you look at the middle school, you're going to see the exact same thing. You know, some of these, though, kind of go back to the figures that we were talking about earlier. While on paper, they might be in the athletic period, in reality, they're not. You know, for instance, I starred the football up there. It says 7. There's never more than 4, and they're not there full time. If you go after school, there's 2. So there's 2 coaches with over 100 8th graders. If you would have gone into the morning, you would have started out with 4 and ended with 3 with 7th grade. You know, just to give you an example. So while we did have them, we weren't able to actually utilize them with the kids in the manner that we really want to, you know, and as Katie charged us to look at this and find a better way, it was pretty easy for us to come back and see some things that allowed us not only to save money, but improve the days of our coaches and our kids. So how do we fix it? You know, the biggest thing is just assigning a dedicated middle school staff of 5 male and 5 female. We're not talking about adding people at all. We're talking about eliminating 17 sections of drive time right now for our coaches. You know, getting with Mr. Cutter, and as through attrition, as teaching positions opening up, just saying, hey, where can you tie a section of athletics to that teaching unit, and then being able to, backfill these positions and moving some of our personnel around to eliminate some of the drops. Allow the coaches to play an active role in the culture of the campus is really what we want to accomplish by doing this. Number two, maximize our staff overall, high school and middle school, by utilizing our assistant coaches in more than one sport. Every coach, well, I'm not even going to say that. That's not true. I think some coaches would say, hey, I just want to coach one sport. That's really what I want to do. I don't think that we're at a place right now where we have that luxury. And I don't think we have to. I think that we can find excellent coaches that can go out there and support and coach kids and make them better at what we ask them to do. I think, now I will say this, head coaches will only have one sport. Our head coaches would still be solely focused just on their program. We can say what we want. They have to win. They have to have a healthy, supportive program, and we want to give them every opportunity to be successful in that. Our assistants, I'll tell you this, when we hire coaches, obviously there's a certain skill set that we want in our coaches, but that is secondary to the heart of the person that we're trying to hire. And we're going to go find excellent teachers that we feel can go pour into these kids and step up and lead them in the fall and the spring. I will say this, most of our coaches are doing this right now. This is not something that we're going to be able to snap our fingers and immediately go to, but I do think it is a model moving forward that we can also go to. Another thing that Anna brought up is requiring our coaches to get bus certified. I think would go a long way in some of the cost saving things that we're looking to as well.
I think just two of the things Coach Ross mentioned really hit on our most important things that we've talked about for the last few months. The first one being staff satisfaction. We're going to have coaches who want to stay here. Right now, I think it's a toss-up. It's hard to go out and recruit somebody and say, come work for us. You're going to be going from this campus to this campus to this campus. You're going to be working with some great kids. I mean, that's all well and good, but they want to be with those kids all day long. And also the positive impact that it's going to have on the budget. He says 17 sections. You look at what that's essentially 3 teaching positions, right? That we're saving by doing this. 3 teaching positions on average $60,000, that's $180,000. So we're potentially saving just by asking you to stay in. So we want you to enjoy by doing this, you're going to enjoy your job more. And we're going to save money. I don't know if there's
I'll add too, I think the experience specifically for middle school, because it seems where that's a little bit of the bumpy, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm not too far removed from that. My kids are in high school now, but I remember them playing the middle school sports. And it was hard because it wasn't the coach's fault. He or she was pulled this place, that place, and the kid was in the gym, not dressed out, doing their homework. My kids never had homework in middle school because they did it all in the gym when they weren't getting to dress out. And that takes away from the kids' experience. So I love this solution because they're going to have a better experience as well, bonding with that coach, getting to play the sport they're wanting to play, not sitting in the gym saying, yeah, we didn't get to dress out again. And that's no one's fault. It was just a kind of a wacky system. I just love that y'all are uncovering, and it's going to be better for, it sounds like, coaches, kids, the whole system.
the question too is our PE teachers in elementary school we have a full-time PE. That just improves the culture. They get to be a part of that instead of having people coming and going and having a long work all throughout the day. Coaches come and go. As much as some of our parents may not want to admit, middle school boys are probably the most unpredictable group of kids in our and I can attest to that. I can honestly say that.
Agree with that.
So much time, right? There's not one person on our campus at the middle school who's more impactful than middle school boys than our coaches. And to have them in the hallways with those boys, interacting with the kids, having them in class, you're going to immediately see improved culture, improved behavior at the middle school.
We also fix an elementary PE situation where in the spring, everything's in season for a time. Every sport we have except for volleyball and football is in season. So you have all of those coaches that are having to leave early, they're missing school. And middle school boys, I don't want to go volunteer and be the substitute in the elementary PE room. I don't want to do that. Neither did a lot of y'all. So we had a hard time finding those people, and we weren't adequately, not just coverage, but providing instruction in that as well. Not like we can now.
Also likes that this is probably going to help you build better master schedules for the middle school, Sloan Creek, and elementary and the high school, because you're
Absolutely.
decoupling connections between those different campuses. And if a coach, as you show on this diagram, is going to 3 different campuses, all 3 of those campuses have to coordinate. Now we kind of decouple that a little bit, and now we can probably even offer PE at alternate times that we've never offered before because the coach wasn't available.
That's exactly right. So it's already, Mr. Cutter has a unique idea in the middle school right now with the strength and conditioning course. I think it's going to be great for our kids, not necessarily maybe your non-football kids that don't want to be in football, but still want the strength and conditioning. Now we're going to have an opportunity for them to have that. And we couldn't do that if we didn't change the schedule.
Right.
Because we're adding essentially teaching staff, coaches are going to be teaching, you're going to see class size increase so much, because you're going to have more sections of teaching.
So what you're actually saying here is you're actually thinking about offering some electives around strength and conditioning that not even on the table at all right now.
We've been able to increase student opportunity. I think this is a great example of something that we've been talking a lot about internally in regard to challenges, right? We're facing some serious financial challenges, which means we have to look at things deeply, do some things differently. However, it has put pressure on us to collaborate deeper, to be more strategic, to be more aligned. And what we're finding is there are many things that we are actually going to get better at, get more effective. We will get more efficient and more effective because of the way we're having to work together to solve some of these challenges.
We're seeing the actual fruits of that effort. You're not just saying these words. We're actually seeing something change as a result of those actions. That's what I like to see. That's what makes me feel good about the changes that I know we're still talking about, but I say feel good about them. Has some comfort level that we're not costing our kids the opportunities that they had before
Absolutely.
unnecessarily.
Is the limiting factor on this the certifications of the coaches?
Can be, you know, as you're moving towards the high school, like you have to have a unique certification. It's completely different than in elementary. You know,
So is that why we couldn't just implement this 100% immediately next year is because of the, I mean, what would, I mean, this seems like it's a win-win for everybody
It
for,
is.
and you said it would take some time to fully implement. Why wouldn't we just 100% implement day one of next year with the new master schedule? And it has to be the certification limitations.
Because I can't say exactly, you know, we're about to be interviewing for who's going to get the PE jobs.
Knowing which
I don't know
personnel go which
exactly
places.
what person is going to get what job. Then I would know exactly what certifications are left. And, you know, one thing we did do, Katie had everybody involved in their master schedules was all in one room. And from what I understand, that was the first time that had ever been done in Lovejoy. And it was such a learning experience for everyone in the room because there were no notes. Everybody was wide open looking for opportunities for us to get better. And that's a lot of this was born out of that meeting that Katie had with students. So as we move forward, once we understand who these PE people are, Mr. Taines, it may line right out. If not, it's going to be very, very close.
We've been talking about this for probably 13 years. It just never had the push ability of Hey, go put the parameters in charge to do it. This is easy stuff. I mean, this is done not just this is not.
Yeah, three things I've just shared. Appreciate the teamwork and leadership from Ms. Cordell, Coach Ross, Mr. Parker, and anybody else involved to come up with a solution that enhances our culture, augments success for the kids and provides opportunity and saves us money. So athletics prior to 2 years ago has been something that was a challenge here. We had a hard time, many of our residents may or may not know, hiring and retaining good coaches, partly because of our culture, and partly because of how we handled athletics as a matter of our mindset. So through y'all's collective leadership, we're evolving that. And I think immediately we're seeing the fruits of our labors from that perspective. So as we enhance that culture across all of our programs, not just this one. So I appreciate the solutions, and I really appreciate you all working together as a team and the humility to work together and do these things that we need to do. A no-brainer and a really good solution. So thank y'all for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 12, fine arts programming considerations. Mr. Parker.
Yes, when we, going back to the TASB staffing review, that review, when we went over that, when TASB presented that to us, it did include fine arts. Fine arts was really embedded in just the general staffing recommendations that they made to us. So I wanted to just take an opportunity after I'd sat down with Dr. Matthew, who's going to join us and go into it a little bit deeper. But I wanted to lift out away from just general staffing. What does our fine arts staffing look like? Are there any efficiencies to find in fine arts? And for you guys to know too, how do we staff fine arts K-12 in the district? It's going to look a little bit different. I mean, a little bit similar to what our athletics are, because our fine arts want their hands on our kids K-12. What you'll also find out is that when you talk about beginning band, for instance, it's a lot like a football practice, and that it's very specialized. In football, you have a coach who works with the defensive backs. You have a coach who works with the wide receivers. In fine arts, you have a director who works with this section of instruments and with this section of instruments. And so it looks very similar to that. So because of that, we do have directors. The difference being is our directors in fine arts, they teach those classes all day long. And so they're not having to hurry up and get back and teach an academic class when they're coaching at a different campus. So the flexibility that we have with fine arts is a little bit different than athletics, because they do teach band the entire day, or they do teach choir the entire day. So it doesn't present the problems or the issues or the struggles that we have like athletics does. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Matthew. She's going to go through just how we are staffed in the fine arts. We'll answer any questions that you guys have.
Hello, it's always such a pleasure to be here and talk about the love of my life here in Lovejoy, which is fine arts. To get started, one of the things I did not include in this slide, and I told Kevin today I really wanted to share, when we've been working on data, it's like they said, we're uncovering every single rock. And one of the things I really enjoy doing and have done for the last several years is look at data, how retention and attrition looks from the time they're sixth graders until they get to high school. Currently, we serve 2,142 students in fine arts 6th through 12th grade. And I know that athletics probably has very identical numbers. And I think that's important to note because we do in both of our programs really excel at fine arts, and we work deeply with our coaches and with our fine arts directors to come up with programs.
What was that number again?
From 6 through 12, 2,142 kids. And that's 337 at Sloan Creek, 677 at Willow Springs, and 1,128 at the high school. As we've been talking about efficiency like athletics, we really wanted to look at where our staff are during the day, who's traveling, where are they going, how many times do they travel. So I thought I would start out just talking a little bit about that. We'll dive into each of the programs as we go through the rest of the presentation. We currently have 32 fine arts faculty, 28 of them are secondary, 4 of them are elementary. Of the high school fine arts or the secondary fine arts faculty, 13 travel, so that's about half. Most of them are a start at Sloan Creek, go to Willow. So it's one travel during the day. I know our high school band directors, they do a round trip, but they ride together. So technically that's just one vehicle. But nonetheless,
Love the carpool.
We're already looking for efficiency, carpooling. But I gave you the list of which ones are traveling. And I only looked at it as far as the curricular part of the day. This doesn't include extracurricular or things like that. I think that would be a little bit hard to deeply track. But that gives you for them to teach class sort of what they're doing. And I looked at the daily costs of that. I took the little map that we use and we turn in our mileage each month and kind of factored where they were going. And right now it's about $26 a day for the fine arts faculty to travel between campuses to teach class. And then I went out and did, based on a kind of a 10-month year, it's about $6,500 a year. And when you're thinking about, do we put staff in place to cover a campus all day long, or do we look at that? I just thought that was a pretty interesting piece when we're talking about how do we save money. Is that a place we are being efficient, or would it be efficient to try to have someone on a campus all day long? I wanted to start with our band program. I kind of did them in alpha order. We have 6 band directors. And in the first big block, it sort of tells you where each one of the directors are throughout the day, or how many periods of band that they're teaching. We have 346 students. Did I say that right? Can't see that far. 346 kiddos in band. We have approximately 20 ensembles, and I'm going to tell you, I got really excited because Mr. Hoyer literally teaches 8 periods a day. At the high school, we actually have 6 periods of band, so that technically makes us have 18 sections and sections and ensembles. What's the difference between a section versus an ensemble? Kevin did a really good job of talking about that. In 6th grade, band and orchestra, we meet in sections. That means the violins have a period together. The trumpets have a class period together. So in 6th grade, we look at them as sections as opposed to ensembles. Once you go to middle school and on to high school, our music programs go into ensembles. So at the middle school, we have 3 band ensembles, and at the high school, we have 4 band ensembles. So I hope that kind of is some clarity there. We looked at the data groups from the demographer. I will tell you what's interesting for me is that in fine arts, those are not necessarily all of our competitive regions, as far as when you're thinking about what other schools would I want to be like, what other schools are we competitive with. We're competitive with schools in Region 25, which are a lot of our Metroplex neighbors. And Region 25 is probably one of the top 3 music regions in the state of Texas, which means that we're producing some of the best music education in this region. So it's a little bit hard, like, to look at White House or to Lindell as a comparison group, but I understand from our demographer, there's some similarities there. What we wanted to look at also is, what are those folks doing as far as directors? Are they sharing across? Do they have directors identified to one campus? And as you can see, I tried to include, in most cases, everyone sharing directors. The high schools are working at middle school. A lot of middle schools are 6 through 8 as opposed to a 5, 6, and 7, 8 campus. But what I found in looking at all of these, directors are sharing teacher responsibilities across campuses. So we're pretty consistent with respect to that. Our Lovejoy choir currently has 235 kiddos in it across 3 campuses. We have 3 directors. That's really consistent with the data group that the demographer provided for us. They have 10 ensemble groups at 6th grade. In 6th grade choir, we consider them an ensemble. There's 3 periods of choir there. So that is how we came up with their ensembles. Currently, we have 2 at middle school. Our middle school program has dipped just a little bit in numbers. And then at the high school, we have 5 ensembles. And again, as I mentioned, pretty much within the comparison data, those directors in those other school districts are doing the same thing as ours. They're moving between campuses to provide choir. Orchestra was a really unique data research. In the data group that was provided, we at Highland Park and Alamo Heights are the only ones that have orchestra programs. If you were to look at our Region 23 music, which we would be competitive with, most of our Metroplex schools do have orchestras. We have 272 kids in orchestra. When I think about over 16 years of program that has grown, those of you that have been around forever know that we started out with just a handful of kiddos, and now we have grown into a pretty incredible, sizable orchestra for our district. Again, you can see across right now, mostly our middle school and Slow Creek directors cover those 2 campuses, and high school is covering high school and middle school right now. But again, even if you were to look around, that sharing across campuses data is pretty consistent with what everyone, not only in our music region, but in the demographers data set, are doing as well. Yes.
Can you tell me, you said it's District 23?
Uh-huh.
So you said they're neighbors in the Metroplex. Now I'm just curious because I didn't know there are so many places that don't have orchestra.
Yeah.
So is that like the Frisco's? Like who else is that?
Region 25, I may have said 23.
Okay,
but
I
it's
might have
Region
missed-
25. In our region, we have Plano ISD, we have Allen ISD, the Frisco schools. We have,
So
there's
it doesn't
several
matter if it's
smaller-
5 or 6A either.
No, we
Okay.
compete 4, 5, and 6A
Okay.
within that region. For marching contest, you see more of the 5A schools together, the 6A schools, the 4A schools. When we go to UIL, for solo and ensemble, even for TMEA, our kids are competing against the large 6A schools. And sometimes we'll have opportunities, depending on how they advance, to even bump up and play with the 6A students.
Got it. Okay. So I always assumed when you get to 6th grade and you get to choose, you know, band, choir, orchestra, whatever, that everyone had those same choices, but I guess they don't.
No, they don't. It's been
Okay.
really interesting. Even in looking in across our region, most of the schools that are our next door neighbors offer the same fine arts that we
Got it.
do.
Okay.
But as you go across the Metroplex, it kind of ebbs and flows as to who has orchestra. Pretty much everyone has band, choir, art, cheerleading, dance, that sort of thing, but orchestra ebbs and flows a little bit.
Perfect. Thank you.
Theater, we currently have 2 theater directors. One of the exciting things in our theater program right now is that we've really seen a growth at our middle school level. We have a really big 7th grade class. I saw the Willow Springs counselors today and was like, how soon can I call you with registration for next year? We're anxious to see what those numbers are going to do. Our comparison data, most people have a head theater director and a tech director. I would say that's probably pretty true of our region as well. But right now, based on the numbers in our program, we're just shy of probably bringing in that 3rd person. So we're anxious to see how we're going to grow in the next couple of years if that's something that we can adjust. What is interesting about this data, the theater students don't always compete with the Region 25 kids like the music. So theater is like in a whole different reason, kind of like football and basketball are 2 different, isn't that right? So in this, would a double check. In our theater group, what was interesting to me with the data group, Lovejoy out of the 5A schools is the only one that hasn't had a state showing in the last 5 years. Melissa, I don't know if they've up to 4A or not, so I apologize. I don't know that data off the top of my head, but Melissa and Lindell in 4A have had state showings like Lovejoy. For our dance department, our Majestics, we currently have 1 director. Most of the area that has a program has 2. I would say within our region, it would be normal for there to be an assistant or a head director and an assistant. Again, our numbers are still growing. Ms. Simone is doing a great job with our middle school. We're kind of seeing from the year that we had the 7 periods to where we are now. That's been, I think those kids are 9th and 10th graders. So we're starting to see those numbers shift a little bit and more kids interested in dance. Our cheer program is probably the one fine arts program that is most like athletics, and that our cheer coaches also teach academics. So when you look at Coach 1, Coach 2, Coach 3, you see they have 1 or 2 periods of cheer. The rest of their schedule is filled with whatever academic content they teach. Coach Wiggins is our full-time head cheer coach. She teaches across middle school and high school and leads our cheer program. One of the reasons that we have 4 coaches is if you have been in Lovejoy ISD from about November to December to remember, we have our cheerleaders are pretty much cheering somewhere just about every single night between volleyball, basketball, and football. And we have a freshman cheer coach who manages the freshman cheerleaders, a JV cheer coach that follows the JV, and then of course Shelly's sort of everywhere. And then we have a middle school coach that manages the after school part of middle. So I would say for our cheer coaches, there's a whole lot of after school activity, which is why we have this, a coach assigned to each one of the squads to help manage that. Our Lovejoy Guard is currently ran by a paraprofessional, which is a little bit different from our other programs. That's something that really has happened within the last 5 years in the fine arts world of color guard. Typically, the band program would hire an instructor to come work with the color guard, but in more recent years, as Metroplex directors got together, we came to the conclusion really the school district should have a piece in that because all of the color guard programs are usually a pretty sizable number of kids comparable to your dance team or cheerleading squad. And the district having a hand in hiring, doing background checks, having that depth of knowledge about each director is something that has become more important over the years. So that person is a paraprofessional. They only come in to teach color guard. And that is another program that in the last 5 years went from literally one student to we have 57 kiddos in the program now. The middle school numbers have been a little bit up and down with COVID, but I'm looking forward to seeing how kids choose to register for it this year.
Say something about the guard. I was extremely unfamiliar with color guard when I came back from elementary to middle school. We didn't have my first go around at the middle school, so I was extremely unfamiliar with it. The one thing that struck me about color guard is if there is specific, really the roles at the middle school, they need to be connected to a group, right? They don't need to be floating around with nothing to do. This program right here is a perfectly in the spot for them because they get to go, they're immediately connected. They work really, really hard and they put together a great product. Our color guard program and the two guys who have led that and directors over the past few years have done a phenomenal job of growing. I remember at least being in the initial discussions about bringing this on board at middle school. This is not, they have blown it out of the water as far as how they do it in the classroom.
And they just won. They won their major class this past week, so they are like the area champions of their class. One other thing I would say about GUARD that's just an interesting tidbit, as I have been doing research, not only on these districts, but our area neighboring districts, is where does color guard fall as far as, is it a band program? Is it a dance program? And it's been really interesting in that about 50% have it assigned to band because we all think of it as the fall marching with the band. But they actually have this huge season in the spring called Winter Guard. They completely changed. You're not called color guard anymore. You are now the Winter Guard. And so they really incorporate a lot of dance and such in their programs. And what I'm starting to find is people are trying to classify where color guard should fall now that it's become more of a district responsibility as opposed to the band booster responsibility. It's starting to fall under dance, which I thought that's probably a good idea. It's a good place for it to be. Visual art, you got to meet them in January. You know, we have one of the most prolific visual art programs in the area. That is something that I have learned in the last few years, that what we do here is really not comparable to what other school districts are doing. We currently at the high have 749 kiddos enrolled in art from 6th through 12th grade. We have 4 teachers at the high school. I tease Mr. Mayfield all the time. We probably need a 5th. We just don't have a space for a 5th. But as you all know, that is a program that has grown tremendously over the years for us. It's also at high school, a great place for kids to land who need to get their fine art credit, but then they just kind of stay, which is good. I didn't do comparison data for them because it looks so different across, and I think that campuses staff visual arts based on how many kids they have and so forth. So I did not know that that was necessary, but I'm happy to get it for you if you'd like to look at it. The last little group we want to look at is our music specialists at elementary level. They both teach elementary music all day long and serves as our coordinator for elementary music and art. Our 5th grade teachers in art and music fall as elementary specialists on the 5th grade side, but then they teach the 6th grade choir or 6th grade art 1. So I counted for those 2 on their respective slides with the secondary side. So that's information that we have for you. I don't know that we particularly found inefficiencies in how we're traveling, only because they're usually moving across and are moving across to another campus to teach another class of band, art, or whatever. Our campuses, despite the master schedule being a really tricky beast, especially at the high school level where there's so many singletons, and we work really hard to make sure kids that are in athletics can also do fine arts. So we are finagled throughout the schedule, but I do feel like our principals have been really intentional in making sure that those kids can have those experiences that are fine arts and athletics or the other electives that they'd like to do.
So do you find any stress like we were hearing coaches feel? Do you feel any of that with any of the fine arts teachers?
I think that there is stress, but I don't think it's bad stress. If you had to say, do you not want to travel and never see your sixth graders, or would you travel and know that you are molding sixth grade for middle school? They would lean on, I want to mold sixth graders for middle school. And I think they're really invested. We actually met as a music staff right before spring break, and the professional development day we had on a Friday and talked about that. And that is a draw to come here, to know that you get to have your sixth graders every single day and really influence how they start on their instrument or with their voice. And I think long-term that really has a dynamic impact on what happens at the secondary level where it's highly competitive. So I would say that it might be stressful at times, but I think the staff would say they would prefer it to stay that way.
We not had the same turnover concerns within the fine arts as we've had, like you said, with the athletics?
No, I don't think so. Not for the same kind of reasons. I do have one staff member that covers all three campuses to teach percussion. And I think they come in knowing that because they do it in other school districts. And since it's common for your high school band directors to work with middle school in a district more our size, or middle school are working with 6th through 8th, it's more common than not common. So I don't think that the turnover would be because of that.
I wanted to know, how do you handle as they enter 6th grade and they get to choose the master schedule and ensuring that the kid that has the passion for art or whatever it might be gets to take that? Like, is there cross certification? Like, how do you make sure the kid that wants what they want gets to do it? Because you're kind of, like you were saying, molding them on their artistic journey. So I'm just curious more about that, and if there's anything you could share.
The one that we're really only limited on is the visual arts.
Yeah.
And so the reason why is the way the master schedule, I think, has been developed. So
Okay.
the way this happens, looking at next year, is really going to open up the 6th graders to give them an opportunity to not do the lottery system.
Right.
So,
I just asked because I know there's a lot that want in it. So I was hoping you were evaluating, and that's great news. Thank you.
So since I've been on the board, this is the first time I've seen this kind of data on our fine arts program. So I'm really appreciative of that. Helps me understand what we're doing. Can you add back questions I have on orchestra around our uniqueness in that offering? So can you detail that by school and tell me about that more?
Uniqueness as related to other school districts or just within our school?
My understanding is that a lot of schools don't offer it. I know we are. That's great.
I think some of the schools in our data, the 2 4A schools, they may not offer it just simply because of size. As far as the other schools, it looks like their schools have been established longer, like Denison. Let me go back and look at which ones do it though. I don't want to misspeak. I think looking at White House and Lindale or smaller East Texas area schools, and I don't know that orchestra is as prolific in the smaller rural towns as it might be in the more urban areas. For Denison, they've been around for a while, and we've actually had the opportunity when we were remodeling our fine arts wing to go and visit their school and speak with their director of fine arts. And their theater program in Denison is actually one of the largest fine arts programs in that particular school. And it sounds like they have been very intentional in only offering a few arts so that there are more numbers than fewer numbers, because it does start to dilute the water across programs the more that you offer. As far as Princeton, I'm not really sure why. It wouldn't surprise me if, because they are a younger school district, or not necessarily younger, but they seem to be growing as far as the type of population that's moving that direction. It wouldn't surprise me if in time we saw an orchestra happen there, especially because they are in our region. Melissa,
Princeton's definitely in transition as far as
their fine arts.
Do the folks around us have orchestra?
Yes.
Alan, McKinney, Frisco?
Allen, McKinney, Frisco, Wiley. Wiley they don't have it at both of their high schools. If you choose orchestra, then you choose to go to, I think it's Wiley East that has it, but they don't have it at both high schools. But most of our next door neighbor schools, really across this part, North Dallas Metroplex, would most likely have an orchestra program. But I think as you start getting out to more rural areas, Their focus is going to be on band because band with marching band is going to be more competitive than the opportunities for orchestra, especially with Lone Star Cup and that sort of thing. So if I had to make an educated guess, I would think band is a more common music, instrumental, fine arts, and you would have to have the population interested in orchestra in order to have that program started.
I would also say the further we get from the city, the less opportunities you have for individualized instruction for the number of kids from kindergarten.
Like lessons privately and
Yeah.
such, right?
So if you will get those opportunities, so you're going to actually really get.
So through all this process, are you doing another step of overlays of each? So I think what I'm hearing
I
you
already
say is,
have that if you would like to see it.
no, not at the moment, but have you been able to ascertain whether or not there's similar, not necessarily commuting between campuses? You've already addressed that.
Yes.
Are there other savings to be had through master scheduling adjustments or things like that? Or I think you've already mentioned some enhancements for offerings to kids, which is great.
Right, which would have to be down the road probably. What I have found, we really looked at our region schools. We also looked at other schools that are not, I mean, Highland Park is obviously one we would always look at. But I found that we're really pretty similar to what other schools are doing. I really started out looking at the sixth grade model because I know there's a lot of conversation around what that schedule would look like. And what's been interesting is that I found that Allen ISD is, to me, a little bit of an outlier because of the way they do sixth grade. Their sixth grade music rotation, it's in a rotation where the kids have it. I think for like one group has it 2 days and another group has it 2 days. But most everyone else, even when I would pull some districts have the band director schedule or the orchestra director schedule, and looking at it, I found what we're doing is more similar to everyone. Even when you look at the schools that are 5-6, Wiley has a 5-6, Forney has a 5-6, Keller has a 5-6. When you look at 5-6 programs and 7-8, then compare them to 6th through 8th grade programs, there are still similarities in how folks are doing the music side. As far as theater or dance or cheer, those it looks like they're like we are. They try to balance out where they need to fall into the schedule. But to me, the real interest lies in how do you do that sixth grade rotation or every day, how you're going to do it to maximize the student experience, but also be cost effective for the district. And do I have a clean solution for that other than what we're currently doing? I can honestly say that I don't have a better solution than what we're doing.
So it sounds, if I looked at the numbers right, the ones that are traveling in the middle of the day are still teaching 6 out of the 8 sections. So they're being as efficient as the other
We're pretty
people.
much operating full capacity. And
We
and
are.
the reason why we do it is, like, for instance, we have the full-time band director, going back to that, because the number of staff we have. He may go ahead and have the band started, and because times don't necessarily perfectly match, we'll get the band started, and then the 2 other staff members come and they split apart.
So the one consideration though is if we're thinking about this 6.5 of 8 as a possible way to make us more efficient, that might not be realistic for some of these electives.
Or it would hurt the programming probably and it would limit it.
I think something that we need to really be transparent about is that fine arts is different from athletics in that our athletic coaches coach during athletic
Academics,
period,
yeah.
then they teach an academic core where our fine arts directors are teaching fine arts throughout the day. So when we talk about this pairing of excellence and efficiency that we want to have, one of the best things that we can continue to do is really build strong programs that draw students, because when we're serving a good number of students, have those class size ratios that Ms. Koenig talked about, then we're going to be more efficient, right? And we're going to be maximizing that staff, maximizing those incredible opportunities for kids. And then we don't have to find as many other electives for them to be in, which corresponds to staff.
You know, it's that relationship between number of students and space. When you have a big band hall, you don't fill it up, right? You don't have 25 kids in the band hall because they're somewhere else. And that means the other classes are going big. So we want to grow the programs now because they have the bigger spaces.
I would say retention really is vital for us as a secondary performing arts program, because those numbers creating your ensembles are really impacting when you go to contests. Following through marching contests this year, there's a significant difference in bands in a 5A that have 120 kids versus a band that has 200 kids. So it's really important to, as we're thinking about the schedule, that we create one that is cost effective and efficient, but also allows for those students to maintain that music program all the way through secondary, because if we lose kids at middle school by the time they get to high school where it's competitive, and it's really important for not just for us, but for those opportunities for them to thrive at a high level, it's challenging if we have created a schedule that causes them to not be able to have that elective in their schedule.
I think
That's
another
a
thing,
domino effect that
Jason
happens.
mentioned the 6.5 of 8. We need to be cautious about these leaders of these fine art programs and the coaches. They're doing more than just your normal school day, right? Like I think about the cheer coach and all the places that she must have to be. I mean, so she probably is really depending on those 2 periods. Same with our coaches when they're in season. I mean, I don't understand all the inner workings of all the programs, but that would be a concern to me. I just want to make sure we keep their quality of life.
Well, and I think this is probably going to be true with our athletic coaches. My glitch that I made on the band where I said we had 8 periods of band, it's because I was thinking through where Paul is all day long. Paul, there's 8 periods. He's teaching all 8 periods. He doesn't choose to take a conference because that means a student is not getting to receive some kind of knowledge that he has to impart on them. And I just think it's already in their mantra to teach like that, but to intentionally take it away in the moments they do want to take that opportunity to have that conference time or need to meet as a team, then, yes, it kind of stinks to not have that. But he does. He does.
Well, and
In all
that's
fairness, he
what I'm
he
worried
has 2
about.
conference periods.
As long as they have the
Yes.
choice, I just wouldn't want them to feel they don't
Yes.
have
Yeah.
those tools to be effective
Yes.
in all the pieces,
Just
right?
because he does that, he does not have to do that. But I just think that that's the way our directors and coaches are wired. They're going to be wherever kids need to be to make sure they're as ready as they can be in their fine art or their sport.
I think our fine arts directors and all of them are just amazing. And I've just to, build upon what you're saying there, and that is I've seen them Monday through Friday, and then again on Saturday morning, not during the school day, at night, doing the things that they need to do for their kids. And so the capacity is there, and we need to take full advantage of it. But also I want to ask a little bit more about that capacity. It feels like we're at the top end of that capacity. How about the change we made a couple of years ago where we took a period out for the 7th grade, reduced the fine arts instructors? If we get more kids, are you saying that we might be over capacity and we're going to be turning away some kids in some of the programming?
I don't think that that's a concern. Probably the only place might be 6th grade art, because we only can offer 3 periods of 6th grade art because we have to offer under the current schedule. But anywhere else, band, choir, orchestra, y'all come.
So
Dance,
should you rebalance that?
that would.
If there's more demand for art than orchestra?
We are studying that right now, and Ms. Halpin is working in partnership with Dr. Tinsley on some things, and communication will be forthcoming. That's not quite ready yet, but we've identified that as a concern in regard to student opportunity.
Really thankful for the transparency. Like I said, since my time on the board, first time I've gotten this kind of detail. So it helps me, especially as we're turning over every rock through this process, to understand what we're doing. So really grateful for the information.
One of the other things I'll add, just because Marvin brought it up, what does it look like when we lose a period? I have tracked that data for fine arts, because that year that we did that, there was a significant impact at our middle school and several of our fine arts programs. So I'm happy to add this year, because I've tracked what happened that 7th grade class, 8th grade, 9th grade. And you can see that there's like this little dip in that one class that's going through that is now they're in high school, and that's certainly an impact to our high school. So I'm happy to share that data if you're interested in looking at that trajectory of information from that year to the present.
That year that we went down to 7 periods, those students who were out in 7th or 8th grade
ninth and 10th graders.
So you're gonna see a little bit of a long numbers.
So I've heard two comments around that. I don't have personal experience with it, but the things that have been said to me around that were we were forcing kids to choose electives they wouldn't have chosen otherwise at the younger level. And that may not have carried that forward. And or expand on that, because that's the one pushback piece I get that says, yeah, they have to do it. That's why they're doing it. They're not doing it because that's their choice. That could be the same for athletics, not just fine arts. Can you educate me about that more? Those
In
comments?
6th grade, the choices for fine arts to maintain fine arts. 6th grade is the entry level for the secondary fine arts, especially in instrumental music. The way our visual art program functions here, we only have a minimal amount of data since we started 6th grade art program. We've only had that for either 4 or 5 years now. Prior to that, you could only choose to be in 6th grade music, and art may have been in some kind of a rotation with other things. And we changed that so that the students, we had a lot of families saying they wanted their child to be able to start out in art. So we were able to make that adjustment, and we saw those numbers shift. And mostly I would say it was in choir. Prior to that change, our choir numbers were always really big because most students or families, when they're trying to decide that 6th grade fine art, we know we want to be in the band. Gold Joe played this, you're going to be in the band. We know we want to be in the orchestra. We know we want to sing in choir. But what ended up happening is I don't want to have an instrument. I really don't want to be in art. So I just landed in choir for my fine arts. So we always saw really big numbers in the choir program. And then when they would go to 7th grade, you would see those choir numbers really shift really to what I would consider sort of a normal size choir for our school district in middle school. And those kids would filter out to other places. It could be theater, athletics, whatever other kind of electives they want to try. So what's interesting when you look at our data with regards to attrition, that bump from 6th to 7th grade, there's always a significant little jump. And then from 8th to 9th grade, there's a jump because you're moving campuses, possibly having a new teacher. The dynamics of marching band might change the influence of someone choosing that. But for the year in particular, where we went back to 7 periods at the middle school, now students didn't have that extra elective spot. So I don't feel like I have to keep band, choir, or orchestra because I really want to maybe try something different or do something else. Whereas if they have the 8-period day with the 6-period options to choose, or I guess they have a full day of classes to choose from, most of them maintain that instrumental music class. Some of them keep art. And again, I don't have enough data on art yet because it's been such a short amount of time, but it's interesting just to see how the kids move around. But with that 8-period day, it seems like we retain our instrumental music better as opposed to whenever we went down to the 7-period day. It was like that was the one thing they got rid of. Most of our directors want to keep them in 7th grade because if you can hook them in 7th, you kind of going to keep them for a while.
Right.
How many of the kids in fine arts do you see are doing both fine arts and sports where, you know, keeping that 8 periods in the middle school is a good idea because it lets a kid try 2 different things?
Yeah, I think I would say in middle school the shared between athletics and fine arts is, I would almost think it's probably more equitable. As they get to high school, especially once you hit that junior and senior year, when you're really, I know I want to do something in my life with band. I know I want to do art. I want to play football. I want to do whatever. I feel like the junior senior year is where there's an adjustment just because kids are really focusing on what they want to do. They don't always give it up, but I do feel like the attrition, it kind of starts broad and goes that direction when we look at the programs. I haven't done enough research to say what the numbers are as far as students in fine arts and in athletics. That'd probably be some great numbers for us to look at. But I would venture to guess just based on how I know attrition and retention look like in fine arts that in middle school, probably 9th and 10th grade, there's maybe more equity as far as students doing both, but it adjusts as they go to the top, which I kind of would expect that as they're focusing in. Some of our fine arts students, and this probably doesn't work the same way for athletics, but we could have, I'll use our musical. The kids in the musical are usually in both choir and theater. Some of them might be theater and dance. So we see in fine arts as you get to that junior and senior level, even sophomore kids are starting to have more space in their schedule to take more different kinds of fine arts as opposed to just one.
Thank you very much. Great
Thank you.
information.
Yep.
We appreciate it. Item 13 is C&I curriculum instruction. Dr. Tinsley.
So I gave you an update, I think in late January, with some work that we had begun as far as reorganization of the curriculum instruction department. And we've made some changes since then. I think we're really close to having the team complete and all areas fully covered. So I'm really excited about what lies ahead for the department. This is just really kind of our organizational chart that lays out our directors and the coordinators. And then I'm going to go into detail as far as the individual positions and what's going on with them at this time. So we have right now, we have within the department, we have 4 directors. And then we also have several coordinators. So this just lays out some of their responsibilities. So if you'll just bear with me, I think it's important for you to kind of understand what we've been through and why some positions have been added and other positions have maybe been repurposed, and why we have elected not to replace some positions. So we had a senior director of instructional technology and federal programs. That person retired in December 2021. We did not replace that position because we felt like there were some areas that we could do some restructuring in. And for example, the early childhood, really want to grow our early childhood programming and CDC. So we felt like we needed a little bit where we had someone who could dedicate more time to that. And then also looking at the director of curriculum instruction was covering both elementary and secondary. So we just elected not to replace that and replace it with another position. We had a director of curriculum instruction, K-12, that's Mary Mullen. She is now the director of secondary education and assessment and accountability. And we also added to several additional responsibilities that the senior director of technology and federal programs had. One of those is CTE. And that we do have a pretty significant number of students that do engage in those courses, and we see a lot of potential and some growth in those areas too. And Mary has already just stepped in and done a great job with that. But in addition, she also supports 7th through 12th grade curriculum and instruction as well. So with that change in title and responsibilities, there were no changes to any FTE cost. And when I say FTE, any positional cost there. As we added the director of elementary education and early childhood. That person will be supporting it's Aaron Perkins, who is approved tonight, pre-K teaching and learning, pre-K through 6, and have oversight of the Child Development Center. Her position will not actually be, she will carry on through the end of this school year in Richardson in her current position. So she will not officially start with us until the 22-23 school year. So that is actually a new position. Executive Director of Special Education and Student Support at Sancy Fuller. Sancy had a bucket load of a lot of responsibilities, and so we have streamlined some of that because the area of special education is such a complex and heavy, requires a lot of support. That is a lot of her primary responsibility. However, she also has taken on the federal programs oversight that the Senior Director of Instructional Technology and Federal Programs was responsible for. And there were no changes to FTE cost on that. Bree Smith serves as our Director of Advanced Academics. She is continuing with that. We have been analyzing some of the responsibility that Bree is doing that we feel like we can streamline some of the campus with the teachers that we felt like is more suited for the teachers to be doing to free up to put her more in some leadership responsibilities and guiding and supporting teachers throughout the district. We have now have a K-12 mathematics coordinator. That position was formerly two different positions. There was a coordinator of K-6 math, and there was a coordinator of 7-12 math. That is one person now who will be supporting math K-12. So that's actually a reduction of one position. And so that was an FTE cost reduction for the department. We have a secondary RLA and social studies coordinator. In the past, up until this, when I came on board, we did not have a coordinator dedicated to social studies. That was pretty much being handled by the teachers at the middle school and the high school. So that person now, we have a coordinator who is supporting that. There were no changes to FTE cost on that. The same with science. We had a K-6 coordinator. So that person has now assumed K-12 science coordinator. So we have coverage at the secondary level in the area of science.
So quick question. We didn't have a coordinator for social studies through the whole district? It was just.
Not for 7th through 12th.
Okay, it was the K, okay. And then the science was, say that
We
again, it was
had
the
a
younger?
K-6, but we did not have a 7th through 12th.
So that
science
was
coordinator.
extra on, was it like leads? How did that work?
From my understanding, I think a lot of it was handled by the departments, the various departments, and you know, the department chairs were leading some of that too. I can't speak directly to that, but we didn't have anybody at the district level who was supporting that.
Okay.
We also had a coordinator of gifted and talented. That position was vacated in fall 2021, and we are recommending not filling that position and reassigning some of those responsibilities that I discussed that the director would be taking on, and then also the teachers on the campus as well too. So that's going to save us. That's another reduction of an FTE, so that is cost savings as well. We have an elementary reading, language arts, and social studies coordinator. We did not make any changes to that, and that is for K-6 because there are two content areas there, just like the secondary, there are two content areas there. So we felt like dividing that up by elementary and secondary was most appropriate. So there were no changes to the FTE costs. We had a special education coordinator of business compliance. That position was also vacated in fall 2021, and we recommended not filling that position and reassign some of those responsibilities again. So that's another reduction of one position and an FTE cost reduction. And instructional technology coordinator, the person, we do have someone for that we have just reassigned. Excited to have Diana Salak, who is going to be assuming that role. Crystal Hume left in last month. She resigned. We are looking at that we feel like we do need to look at the roles and responsibilities of that position and expand that. And we're super excited about Diana because she's coming to us from she was the K-6 math coordinator. And we feel like with her coming with the curriculum, some of the curriculum background and development is going to really enhance the work in there too. So again, there were no changes to that. We just shifted some people around. And we are going to be adding a special education coordinator just because based on some of the data we've collected through the needs assessment that was conducted last fall with the special education programming and just looking at some of the support that was needed for general education and special education teachers on the campus, we felt like that would be an important position to add. It is a lot of that's going to be time spent on the campus, you know, consulting with teachers, planning with teachers, helping them problem solve, but it will still be they'll work closely with Mrs. Fuller. So that is a new FTE. However, that is going to be approximately 80% of that salary will be funded from federal funds. So it's not going to come out of our local funds either. So with that, we also had a few more positions. We currently have a site director of Lovejoy Early Childhood Center. That is Taylor Dennison, and she primarily handles more of the child care compliance side of the Child Development Center, not so much the early childhood programming. So Mrs. Perkins will be working closely with her as we grow that program. So there were no changes to her responsibilities and no changes to that FTE. We have moved over to the curriculum instruction department, an executive assistant to assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction. That is Sandy Petty. She was up until this point, she was serving as the administrative assistant to the director of technology and federal programs, the senior director position. So we've increased her salary, minimal costs to that because she has assumed some additional responsibilities with the department. So basically she supports the whole department. And then we also have a special education data management and support specialist, and we do need to continue with that position, and there will be no changes to the responsibilities nor FTE costs. So when you look at the total savings on that with how we've restructured and repurposed some positions, we have an estimated cost savings of about $215,000. We do believe this is going to improve pre-K through 12 instructional alignment. It will provide increased support for all programs and content areas. And when I say that, we are being very intentional that we're meeting a lot, we're talking a lot. As Coach pointed out, we're asking some of those questions. Can we do things differently? And I can't applaud the team enough of the work that they've been doing and really stepping out and thinking outside the box, and we're excited about what's ahead for the department. The other areas is just, we feel like this will improve staff efficiencies, also get more support to campuses, which we feel like they may need an opportunity to expand the early childhood programming and possibly be a revenue generation for the district as well too. So just some next steps that as a department that we're going to be doing, we are setting up, we've already set up, I know that some of the directors have already been out meeting with teachers and departments to get together input and insight on what we can do, the department can do to support. We're going to be doing the same thing. I'm personally going to be going out and meeting with grade level teams and just listening and hearing what we can do to support teaching and learning in their areas. We're also, as a department, going to be doing some strategic planning within the department, kind of clarifying our roles and responsibilities, and then where we're all working as a team and not working in silos. So we're super excited.
Great.
Okay.
Questions for Dr. Tinsley? Through my lid.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the updates.
Sure. So you ready for the next?
We are. Item 14. C&I construction.
Yes.
Curriculum and instruction
Yes.
program in consideration.
So there's a
Can't
quote
speak.
here that, inside every problem lies an opportunity. And I think as we've all been coming together a lot and talking, and we're just seeing so many opportunities ahead. And as Kevin has said, it's a lot of fun. Believe it or not, we may be tired of seeing each other all the time, but we're having a lot of fun. we're figuring it out. So it's good. I know principals see another meeting with Laurie. Oh no, it's just, but we're meeting with teachers, we're meeting with principals, the departments are all coming together. So it's just exciting, and just that we can't express enough appreciation for people are coming around the table really wanting to come with solutions. So we want to thank those for that. So I'm just going to kind of recap a little bit about instructional program from the last meeting. The three areas that we look at from instructional program from curriculum instruction is special education, gifted and talented, and English learners. Just a reminder that all students are general education students first. These are programs that enhance their opportunities and accessing learning here in the district. So I'm going to hand it over to Sancy for a few minutes, and she's going to talk about special education.
So I'm going to try to be brief. Some of this will be a little bit of a tutorial, but I think that it's important when we start looking at program and program efficiency, special education always has a little bit of nuances. And so you've seen this before. This is a continuum of services. And I think when Anna was speaking earlier, the question was about mainstream and really what that means in the world of special education. There's a couple of things. When we look at how do we plan and program for a student, we have our ARD meeting, and we're notorious for talking in acronyms. So that really stands for admission, review, and dismissal. And really for each student, we come to the table with the data that is individualized to that student. We look at what do we need to work on? What's the special piece in special education that we need to work on? We then decide how much time that's going to take. And then this is why this is important. It's the where. And when we have those meetings, those plans are built for a year. So if we had one today for a student, it would finish out this school year, and it would go all the way into this time to the following school year. So there's some information that we know on the front end. The other piece that you've heard me say is really if you look at mainstream with modifications, and right before we get to content mastery, that's all supports that are happening inside the general education classroom. That means either there's accommodations or supports that the general education teacher is providing, or there's a special education staff member that comes in to support, or that could look like our co-teach, where we have two teachers, a general education teacher and a special education teaching together. Content mastery, just as a reminder, it's a quick pull out. It's kind of a little quick tune-up. It could be a student who maybe only needs to be pulled out 20 minutes a week to work on a particular skill, and they're going back into the classroom. Resource room, definitely we look at that. That's actually either 21% to 50% of a student's day would fall into that resource room time. That means they are relieving the general education classroom or the mainstream wording that's on the continuum, going to that room. It's a dedicated special education staff member supporting them, and then they go back into general education. And then self-contained is really if a student that has 50% or more of their day in a special education setting, working on those individual education plans. You'll hear us say IEP goals or objectives. Homebound is really a student that is too ill to be able to come to school, and we provide those services in the home setting to support. Again, hospital, if we had a hospital that was in our zone, we would be required to provide services to students who were in that hospital, even if they weren't Lovejoy ISD students, but it happens to be that hospital is in the zone of the school. And then residential, generally those are students who have a pretty high level of need. We would have exhausted all of those continuums before we looked at that level of support for a student. And why I think this is important, and you've heard us all talk a lot about the master schedule. And if we know this a year, we plan for a year, we're really, that's information going into the master schedule, why we've talked about how important it is to have special education scheduling done first, right? We know what they need. And so that allows us then to build around that. Historically, we've not been able to do that all the stakeholders weren't around the table. And so it's really nice to be able to have those conversations and be efficient with staff. So we know here's the parameters of program. We know the time and the where it's going to take place. It's just getting efficient around staffing. What that looks like in Lovejoy, some of it I've talked a little bit about. So in mainstream, that's general education with accommodations or inclusion support. Again, that's a staff member that's coming in to support the student for their specially designed instruction. We do have students that are in the general education classroom, and the standards are adjusted to be able to do the core content of the standards and not necessarily the supporting TEKS. Co-teach, and right now that's for Sloan Creek forward. We have co-teach settings for RLA and math, and that's where we have a special education staff member and a general education staff member that's supporting students. Content mastery is the quick pullout, very short in duration. Resources instruction in a special education room, and then self-contained. For us, what you may hear, life skills, you may hear the terminology life skills. Every school district likes to have cute names for their self-contained program. That's what it would equate to Lovejoy. Again, student plans are determined by the campus ARD committee. So just a recap on, this was baseline data that the TASB, when TASB came and shared, what we had to provide to them was really the students that we serve, why that was important on the continuum. All of that's tied to a coding that we send to the state. It's called instructional coding. And so that percentage of time that I shared, all of those pieces were shared when they started looking at the level of needs and supports. This was a baseline piece. They used the 1 teacher to 15 special education students, or if it was a setting where there was a special education staff member and a paraprofessional, they used the 1 to 7. The baseline data that they came back with is our average is 1 teacher per 11.1 special education students, or if it was a pair and a teacher combination, it's 5.9. It gives us some information to work with. Again, what's a little bit unique for special education is every student's plan is individualized for each student as far as how we support them. Again, more data, we staff 6.9 special education teachers per 100 special education students. State average is 5.8, and then the comparison districts that they looked at was 5.7. There is the caveat that we had in there that, again, those are very individualized students' decisions. So even though they gave here some parameters or some ratios, we still have to make our committee decisions that are based off the students' needs and the data that's brought to the table. So really when we started looking at, well, efficiency is important, and you've heard me say a couple of things. How do we continue to make sure that that individualization for each student takes place? That's why I kind of shared the process. Here's how we get to that information in the ARD meeting. We know due to master schedule efficiencies, we've had to staff at times to be able to meet all of that time that the ARD committee has set forth for students. So if we're trying to then staff after the master schedule's been made, we sometimes would have to add people to be able to support that. So having opportunities to be able to be at the forefront of master schedules, and we know what the plans are, how can we support students along the way? Looking at staffing assignments and responsibility, really looking, Dr. Tinsley talked about role clarity. Are there some things that special education staff members are doing that may not necessarily be the role of a special education staff member, or things that they're helping out with the campus that might take away some opportunities for them to be able to provide additional service time to students, and then looking at absorption of positions and reassignments. So we do each year at the end of the year look at students who may have a higher level of need. So when you look at the continuum that I showed you earlier, if a student had a higher level of need and they were transitioning to another campus, does it make sense to try to keep that person with them? What does the staffing look like at the campus? Sometimes we have grade levels that move out that had a higher number of students who receive services, and the grade levels coming in are not as high. There's a lot of variables that we'll continue to look at. And we do have some positions that we've not been able to fill this year. That's pretty consistent across all districts where there's openings, not only just in special education, but of course in general education. And so do we still need to fill those next year based off needs, based off service time for each student? So those will be pieces that we'll be looking at. Based off that, looking at a potential estimated savings of $200,000, that's about 3 teachers. Or if you look at a combination of teachers and aides, I will say our paraprofessionals probably about 28,000, 25, 28. It depends on their years experience. So it could be a mixture of both. I did share at a previous board meeting. So one of the other things that's unique about special education is there is some caveats that it's called maintenance of effort. And so really what it says is even though special education receives federal funding, the district can't go, well, because you receive this federal funding, we're going to reduce the amount of local dollars that we put into the program. And so very smart. They're all general education students. They just happen to receive services through special education. So that is a piece that we'll continue to monitor because we don't want to be out of compliance with maintenance of effort and want to continue to make sure that we support students providing quality services in the most efficient manner. Questions?
So by making the master schedule more efficient with everybody at the table that hasn't been happening previously, is that really all of the savings that we're talking about by using the people we have more efficiently because they're not going to be in different places and being able to work more through the day?
So right now, when I talked about maintenance of effort, we can't go over the 200,000 without being out of compliance for maintenance of efforts. But again, I think efficiency as we look at each year and how we're coming to the table, looking at master schedules, how we're programming, I do think we'll continue to see cost savings. Special ed is a little bit unique as well because we can have a student that may come to our district that may need 2 staff members to 1 student. So there's always some variables in there. Those are some unknowns. The other part, I believe right now we're serving 396 students, but we have through special education, but we have many evaluations that are pending, and that doesn't take into account anybody that transfer in who's already receiving services. So there's always some nuances to support.
People that are receiving services right now that are worried that they're not going to be receiving the same level of services in the future. They assume that if we're making changes and saving money, that they're going to get a different experience. What can you speak to that?
Yeah, so that's why starting out, talking through the process of how we get to the end goal of providing services is really the ART committee makes those decisions, and it's very data driven for each student, looking at their academic, how they're compared really right now to peers. So if we were looking at a 3rd grade student, where's 3rd grade peers at, and here's where, I'll use my son, here's where Avery Fuller is at, right? And so all of that then drives, here's the areas of strength because we want to capitalize on those areas. And then here's the areas that they're not there yet. That drives the goals, which then we go, how much time do we need to be able to work on those goals, and then where? So that's not a me decision. That's really the ART committee looking at the data for each student.
So families shouldn't be concerned that they're going to be receiving a lesser service, even though we're going to be able to save money in the process.
We're just being efficient how we're using staff. Again, the continuum of services that I've shared with, that's a continuum that all school districts have to fall under. It could look a little bit different of how you use staff to do that, but that continuum is really the base.
If I understood how you started the conversation, instead of scheduling SPED last, we're scheduling SPED first.
Yes, sir.
Correct? So we're putting a greater level of emphasis around that scheduling need before we fill other places.
Absolutely.
That is accurate. And what I also say, and that's a very fair question, of course, for our families that have a student that is served by special education to ask. I would say we've made a couple changes that really speak to our commitment to effectiveness. More isn't always better or more effective. We've done some things targeted at that effectiveness. So special education is now under the curriculum instruction department so that we have that deep alignment and collaboration that needs to be happening. We also, if you noticed in Dr. Tinsley's presentation this evening, that addition of a special education coordinator, leveraging those federal funds as well. So, and then they didn't share this evening, but there are lots of conversations happening about some additional support through training for both our general ed and special education teachers. So I really do think overall this will be a situation of where there's the potential to get more efficient in this area. Obviously, it's always driven by our committee decisions based on the individual student's needs. So it's difficult for us to, at any point, attribute a dollar amount in this area. But of course, we want to be responsible, efficiency-wise, and then we absolutely want to become even more effective at the way we're serving our students in the special education realm.
I know that probably everyone in the community is watching the live stream because we're so riveting, but in case they're not and they're in special education programs, is there a way we can communicate some of this directly to families that are in the program and are concerned about the changes? Do we have I know we send out updates from the principals all the time, but I don't know if there's a way to send out communication directly to families that are impacted and concerned, and just setting expectations and understanding what what we're doing specific to their program? Maybe is
I
something to
think one
think
thing
about.
that we can do that we've talked about as well, I do know that some of our PTOs have a position now that does some liaising with special education through the SAGE group. And I know that Dr. Tinsley and Ms. Fuller have talked about meeting with that group to be able to provide that direct information. And I think that would probably be a really strong start. And is there not also a teacher?
Yes, so
Committee as well?
we did have a, one of the things that came out of the needs assessment, just looking at a program review, were kind of a couple of things, retention, and we want retention really on general education and special education, that we invest in that time and energy and really want to support all students. And if you remember on the continuum, the first part of it was really students are in that general education classroom. And so the other part of it that came out, so we brought, actually we had more general education staff there than special education staff, because really they're based off the feedback. General education wants more training, and how do we support them? And so the 3 goals, and we actually will have the action team come back. I think we're slated to have them come back at the end of the month and do a presentation, but we came out with 3 goals. One was around professional development, one was around retention, and the other was looking at continuing to strengthen reading across all grade levels, and the importance of reading. In special education, there's not a disability in science or social studies, but normally what gets a student is potentially reading deficiencies or math deficiencies. And so how do we continue to strengthen that area? We are working with SAGE. We're looking at a date in April to have parents that just kind of have a coffee and be able to answer any concerns or questions that they have. And then today as a cabinet, our principals were there for some of our meeting. And so we talked through this, and really to your point, we wanted to make sure that we're all clearly communicating, because they are going to be in the ARD meetings, and parents are going to come to their office, and really to be able to have those conversations. Again, where special education is a little bit unique, each student's plan is specific to them. And so there are some things that we can talk big picture in large groups, but to really be able to speak to each parent's individual child, sometimes those are individual conversations.
Understand.
But that's a great question. And definitely we're open if there's other pathways that either the community wants to give us feedback, or you guys see based off feedback you
I
guys
think
get.
the more opportunities for people to interact with the department and feel comfortable knowing where to go when they have questions is probably the biggest.
Absolutely.
Can I can't remember if you said this because we've been here a little while. Did we already hire the new director for the special ed?
The coordinator
Or
position,
coordinator,
that will
sorry.
not be until
Next
next
year?
school year. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
that I think will play a big piece, Jason, don't you? Because that shows kind of the additional support. And so maybe we kind of remind that that's coming. And then as we get closer.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Anna?
I'm almost done. I've got
One
one more. I'm
sorry.
not done yet.
I'm
I'm not
sorry.
completed. I'm
There's
back
more.
here. Hold on. It's not 10 yet, right? So want to give you an update on where we are with our gifted and talented programming. And this just a reminder of what guides our what we are guided to do by the state of Texas as far as program development, and the handbook here, the gifted and talented for students, the accountability standards are outlined in this that outline for the districts what we're accountable for, and also how we can be in exemplary levels as well too. This is laid out in the Texas Education Code as well for compliance of these educational programs. Just a reminder with the TASB study of what was revealed in that is that Lovejoy employs 3 times as many gifted and talented teachers as the state or peer district average. And we have approximately 19.7% of our student population identified as GT. About 6.7% of all teachers assigned to gifted and talented teaching as compared to the state average of 1.8% and 2.6% per peer districts of its total teaching population. And so really what drives your staffing is your master scheduling and your program model. And you've heard those same, it's like a broken record with that. So those are some areas that we looked at. I did want to point out here too, there has been some questions that are some thoughts brought forward that part of what we do, it's been stated that we recruit quite a few kiddos that are GT to the district. So I went back and got some data for you back through 2019 to show you these are the number of total, which you'll see on the first column is the total number of GT students for that year that were enrolled and the number that were actually new to Lovejoy. So that's just some information I thought might be helpful. So when we look at our program design, we have to keep these things in consideration. Is that, are we offering learning experiences for our gifted and talented students that modify the depth, the complexity, and the pacing of the curriculum to meet the unique social, emotional, and intellectual needs of gifted and talented students? Also, are our services for gifted and talented students are they comprehensive, structured, and sequenced and appropriately challenged? And it includes the options in those 4 foundational areas of math, English language arts, reading, social studies, and science. And then also ensuring that our gifted and talented students are provided opportunities to work together with other gifted and talented students as well as other students and work independently during the school day. And that again is outlined in the Texas Education Code. So what we have done, we looked at scheduling adjustments. We looked at how our staff members were assigned and their responsibilities in serving our gifted and talented students. We looked at some staffing reductions at the campus and the district level and how that would be absorbed through positions and possible reassignments. And we have an estimated savings of over $500,000 that we feel like we can have in place through attrition and absorption for the 22-23 school year. One thing I did want to kind of point out here in these next couple of slides, this is probably important. The top part of each is what our current model is. And I also included in that the number of students that are currently enrolled in those grade levels. So for kindergarten right now, the primary responsibility is taught by the general education teacher. They all have their 30 hours of GT hours in order to serve the students. Between the 2 elementary campuses, we have under 10 students that are identified as GT. For next year, we are recommending continuing the current model, what we're doing now for kindergarten. For first grade and second grade right now, it's basically they're being served basically like kindergarten's being served. The teachers, they're in a teacher's classroom that has the 30 GT hours. So they're not being pulled out or they're not being served by the GT teacher. So right now we have in first grade between Puster and Hart 18 students, and in second grade we have 24 students assigned. And I'm kind of giving you these an idea when we look at staffing, when we were talking about class sizes. When it's really not, we don't really want students, 2 or 3 students in a class. It's just not good for the instruction that's being delivered. So what we are recommending is that we're actually going to have the general ed teacher, we're still to serve as a teacher of record, but those students would be pulled out with their GT peers. And so, they would be taught by a GT teacher. So for first grade, right now, we're looking at a couple of days a week for approximately 60 minutes per pull-out period. And then for second grade, we are recommending that they are being pulled out for 3 days a week for approximately 60 minutes each time as well. So we're actually adding back. My understanding, this was changed a couple of years ago, so we're actually adding back.
Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah.
So
I think it happened last spring, actually, to change.
Okay, so that's what we were happy we could do this. Probably the change where you're going to see the most changes are going to be in third grade. Right now they are self-contained in their gifted areas. So they may be self-contained for RLA, for math, for science, or social studies, or all areas. We have 51 students between the two campuses. And so what the recommendation is that the general education teacher will be the teacher record for science and social studies, but they will be pulled out for RLA and math. And RLA right now we're looking at approximately 135 minutes daily and then 90 minutes for math. So that's about 3.75 hours a day that they'll be pulled out. So and so that would be a change from the current model.
Does this gen ed teacher have the 30 hours of GT?
They would be
training as well?
clustered in they would have to be clustered in the classroom with the 30 hours. But when they're being served in RLA and math through a multidisciplinary, that would be the GT teacher.
But their general ed teacher on record, who's also instructing science and social studies, also has GT training?
Right. Fourth grade, we're not recommending any changes. They are being pulled out by their core content areas right now, science, social studies, math, RLA. We have right now between the two campuses 41 students identified. Fifth and sixth grade, no changes in that model as well. They're being served in those core content areas, and there are approximately 73 fifth graders and 80 sixth graders. We're going to have a little bit smaller fifth grade class going into next year. And then 7th through 12th grade, we're not making any recommendations for changes there.
So how does, first and second grade, we're just going back to something we used to do. Third grade's the only one really changing. How does that save $500,000?
Of how we're using staff. Yeah, it's basically how we're using staff. So if you look at so right now, let me give you an example. Puster has 3 GT teachers assigned to their campus. So by taking one of those teachers that will serve first and second and third grade for the pullout, taking two teachers to be looped into they'll be fourth grade teachers. And because fourth grade is departmentalized, they'll just be part of that rotation. So they're still GT teachers, but they're also a fourth grade teacher. So
part of these efficiencies then are having teachers' workloads are going to be both for special education and for the GT. By becoming that much more efficient, that means that some of these teachers are going to be working either more sections or more kids is it just more kids in the classroom, or how do these, is it going to change quality of life for these educators in the special ed or the GT with the additional workload to achieve these efficiencies?
Lori, would it be helpful to give a example of one of the student loads or a couple of the student loads?
Okay, so for example, let's look at, I'm going to use fourth grade. That's probably the easiest one to use there. So by having the, within your fourth grade, having 2 teachers designated as the GT teacher, and because they are having to departmentalize, and so what they do, they rotate through the day. So the GT teacher would be teaching the fourth graders in that grade level math. They'd be teaching them math and science, and then they would also be teaching general education kids because they change classes during the day. So it shouldn't add any workload to them. They'll just be like any other fourth grade teacher. It's just that.
Is it just like going from, in some cases, teaching 4 or 5 kids to having a full classroom? Is that the main difference? Is that what makes it more efficient?
The kids that will be in the GT class with them will be all GT. So it won't change the number. It'll be the same workload as you would like any other, like a general ed teacher would have.
As compared to the current schedule.
As compared to this current schedule. So what they're being pulled now for those content areas, and then they are also having the
teacher schedule, the current teacher GT schedule. what a teacher's day would look like.
I think there's a lot of them
currently.
that have
Like the
really
number
small
of- the
classes,
number of
right?
kids,
They have
right.
They
small
do,
classes.
they do, yeah, right.
A
Mhm.
student- it
And
has-
then what about on the special education side, same concern, or is there any additional workload that we're putting on some of these lead special education teachers that they don't have currently by increasing the efficiencies that we're talking about? I'm trying to figure out if there are any negative impacts to some of these things that we're getting more efficient. That's great, but how is it affecting real people? So I just want to see if there's any negatives that we're not thinking about.
I think it really comes down how we're using, how people are being, how we're serving kids. I don't see it, special education would be, it's not going to change. It's not going to change. Like when you look at a special education teacher, they have a caseload of students. It's not going to change their caseload of students. It's just really how we are staffing some of these classrooms, because sometimes you might be, we've kind of been in the habit of whenever we see a need, we'll just add a staff. And as Katie has said, sometimes more doesn't always solve the problem. Sometimes it's really building capacity and problem solving with teachers at both general education and the special when they're also in the special education classroom, because we want to have a lot of our kids mainstreamed, and we do a lot of inclusion with our special education students. So we want our teachers to be equipped to be able to support those students in the general education classroom and not be dependent on the special education or the paraprofessional to be there to support, if that makes sense.
So more of
So
so we're thinking that some of these special education students might be getting more support from their general ed teachers to fulfill the ARD requirements and not necessarily additional special education staff. Am I understanding
It
that?
could be some of it. It could also be a situation of, because of what Mr. Owen said in regard to master scheduling the special education students on the front end, because they generally have the most contingencies on and limitations on their schedule. By being strategic with that, students that may need inclusion support within the regular classroom, you've done that on the front end so you can be more efficient. Then you can have the paraprofessional, the teacher's aide pushing in to support those two students in that classroom, rather than if that is done last after everything, and those kids are now in different classes and now I need two special education paras to support
I understand.
the two kids,
Sounds
right?
like most of these efficiencies
Mhm.
always go back to the master schedule of making that.
It originates there, and then you have a different mindset of a solution to a problem is to throw people at it versus really go back and solve the initial problem that created the issue to begin with. And so as we've compounded that over a period of time and years, we've come up with, and at least on my observations thus far, I've not seen a dilution of quality of delivery of our programming and the recommendations yet in the form of the reduction of quality of services to the kids. Is that an accurate statement?
correct.
We've not diluted the quality of our offering in any circumstance that I've seen yet, as far as these observations have gone.
And it's how we're using staff. I'm going to give you an example of we have special education lead teachers on each campus. And we are looking at utilizing those positions differently. They have been doing some, it kind of varies from campus to campus, but some of that is some of the administrative work, preparing for ARDs, preparing IEPs, which is all part of the process that we want all of our special education teachers to have, but a manageable caseload. You know, we don't want to have large caseloads, but our seeing is that there's only one Sancy Fuller to get around all the campuses, you know, whenever they're trying to problem solve on how to best support a student on a campus. So what we're wanting to do is to take that special education lead on each campus, get half of the day they would have their caseload of students that they would be supporting. The other half of the day, they would be more of an instructional coach. So they're there on site, on campus, a specialist that can go into a classroom and work with the student or model for a teacher how to best respond to that student. So that's an example of how maybe we repurpose, but we felt like on that we needed somebody on site. So building the capacity of staff in order to best respond.
I just want to be careful that as we're becoming more efficient and working smarter, not harder, that we're not throwing a lot more work on people that are already working really hard. So, yeah, I think.
Get it.
In some ways, we're actually becoming more equitable. Most of our staff, has a full load and is working really hard. We have found some areas where we've got people working very hard, but just the way we schedule things, we're not maximizing them, in direct service to students throughout the day. And by doing more of that consistently across all of our FTEs, that is what is going to allow us to become more efficient.
I'm good.
Any other questions? Those are great questions. These questions are important and I appreciate them. It's great. Thank you. Now is it Anna's turn? District of Innovation.
Yes.
Gonna turn into a pumpkin.
Back in 2017, Lovejoy ISD became a district of innovation. And basically what I'm going to recommend is that we renew our district of innovation plan. So back in 2015, the 84th legislator basically said that districts could make some changes very similar and have options very similar to what charter schools could do. And there are certain things that we can't, change, financial responsibility, accountability, curriculum, testing, some of those types of things, but we can kind of level the playing field a little bit. And so the current District of Innovation expires March 23rd, 2022. And so I'm going to review, currently y'all have 3 distinctions in your plan. The first one is the first day of instruction, and that's your school calendar. And basically what it says is, you have to start school the 4th Monday in August, and we're asking to be exempt from that. That's what the District of Innovation does. It's asking for an exemption so that we can do our calendar, because you know what's best for your kids, and we know what's best for students in our building. So that's one exemption that we would continue to ask for, and this is what you previously have had on your District of Innovation plan the past 5 years, the DOI. The second one is on certification. And basically what certification is, this is where we may have a teacher that is what we'd call hard to fill, or world languages sometimes, that sometimes we can't find. CTE is one where we can't find a certified teacher. I know I had an experience where we were looking for someone that had a nurse in a CTE class, and she had a master's and was great, but she didn't have the teaching certification. So we could we could take them through our process, a District of Innovation process, and basically give them what we call a local permit so that they can teach our students. Okay, so that one you currently have had for the past 5 years also. The third one you had was minimum attendance for class credit or final grade, and this is what they call the 90% rule. Usually y'all had, y'all's was a little bit different. It had for like extracurricular classes for missing seat time, what we'd call seat time. A lot of times it's really for children that may be medically fragile, that can't physically maybe attend 90%. And that's something that we would review, but that's a minimum attendance for class credit or final grade there. So that was another one that you had in the past. Okay, so you had those 3. There are 2 that I would recommend. One is on probationary contracts, and the one on probationary contracts, as far as if you're a teacher that has taught, well, first of all, let me say, so when you come to a new district, you get on a probationary contract. I'm on a probationary contract probably. I'm new here, so you're new, okay? So your second year, after that probationary contract, 1 full year, you would go on a term contract, okay? If you have taught 5 of the last 8 years. So what I would recommend is that we do 2 one-year probationary contracts. So I would go on a probationary contract the following year automatically, okay? And you ask why. Part of the time is because sometimes we have to make those contract recommendations, March or April. We haven't had a full year with a teacher. And this really impacted us during COVID because, spring break, we went home and we were still working with teachers, coaching teachers, and had to make decisions about basically, if they were coming back next year. So that would be one that I would definitely, just, recommend and consider. We have to take this, and I'm going to kind of show you a timeline before we have to take it to our district site-based committee too, for them to review. The next one was the campus behavior coordinator, and a campus behavior coordinator, very common among most districts also. That's where the state says one person is supposed to report all discipline to parents. And usually you have those like at the middle school or high school where an assistant principal that has certain letters of the alphabet would be the person calling the parent, because they probably have the relationship with the parent and not someone like the associate who may not know the child as well. But so that they can work with the family, work with the child, and meet the needs of the child. So those are.
One person doesn't have to be the bad guy too.
Correct.
Spread it around.
So there's, the high school,
I
there'd
like
be
it.
4 or 5. So that would be another one that would recommend. Questions about those? This is the timeline. So I shared this with the cabinet back a couple of weeks, last week, a couple of weeks ago, seems longer than that. Sharing it with you tonight. On Wednesday, I have asked the campus site-based committee to meet. We would review these. What would happen. They may ask, they may want to look at them. I would like to send this information to them ahead of time so they can read it and we can talk about it. And they can either vote then, or we may need to schedule another meeting for that to happen. Then we have to post the DOI or plan on the website for 30 days, and I have to notify the commissioner of education via email. And then on April 25th, you would vote on the DOI plan, and then I have to send another notice to the commissioner. And if you vote on the 25th for the plan, it would go in effect for 5 years, okay? Every year we have to review the plan, and we can either, we can change it, we can amend it, we can add other exemptions to it. It's just something, some districts have 10 or 12. These 5 are fairly basic among Texas districts in the state.
Ms. Keeney, can you go back to the one on minimum attendance for class credit or final grade?
Yes.
This is one that I'm recommending the committee review closely, and then we'll provide additional information to you all about that, because this could be one factor that is impacting our attendance
there.
Particularly at the high school level. Please know that even within that 90% process, there is a process to look at it case-by-case basis, on a case-by-case basis, and make adjustments for medical and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when we have something like this in place, that means there's not that ongoing review of individual situations to make sure we're monitoring student attendance in class. And so this will just need to be an area where there's more discussion about what was the intended impact, what has the actual impact been, and then given where we're at right now in terms of the importance of attendance for student learning, and then obviously for funding as well. We just may need to look at that one with a fresh lens. So I have a question about that. So are the kids penalized if they're in extracurricular and they're not at school? If they're, because like I'm reading this under here. If they're in our extracurricular, again, we don't penalize them. That is school related, right?
Related, yes.
And so that's part of it. Now, if they were on a traveling team that's not school related, so as long as it's school, that would would need to go through the review process.
Yeah.
But it's Lovejoy. So,
Right. So,
so I don't know why that was under there.
Right. Usually you see this for medical reasons.
Got it. Okay. As long as it's not going to hurt kids that are
so, but, things, and we can reword it.
Yeah. And it's through the school. So, okay.
Other questions?
So if it expires the 23rd, but you're posting it the 22nd, is there a grace period before it's approved?
Since we already have an approved plan, we're okay.
Okay.
I checked.
Cool.
Yeah.
I figured, but I thought I'd ask.
Very quickly.
Yes, this is a have to.
I have reviewed, she had reviewed our website, reviewed the plan already, and said, we got to get going and get this renewed to be in compliance. So I appreciate her acting so quickly.
Other questions on this?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, announcements.
The only announcement I have is thank you to the people in this room who've been working so hard. Our last 2 board workshops have been quite intense, thorough, lot of information and data, and that is countless hours that of people in this room, and then also a lot of people who are not in this room. So just want to extend my deep gratitude. We are really in a situation where our financial sustainability has to be utmost priority for the continued survival and thriving of our school district, and the way that they've come together to prioritize that and do that in a way that honors our legacy of excellence and takes care of our kids is just absolutely phenomenal.
I was going to echo those comments, so I won't belabor the same, but thank you. We are overhauling a lot of things, and we're doing it to maintain the level of excellence that we all expect and desire here in this district. I encourage the community to continue to be engaged, to understand, to try not to be too preemptive, but ask the questions you need to ask so we can vet out the things that concern you. And I want to thank those speakers who came tonight who were professional and appreciated their approach to everything as well. So with that, we are adjourned.